Daylene Carlson, a 23-year-old, moved from Idaho to Stockton, California in 2011 to attend college. She was staying with her Aunt Maggie and was excited to begin this new chapter of her life. On the evening of Saturday, August 6, 2011, Daylene was preparing to go out for the evening. With 3 months left before college started, her cousin Cicely had planned to introduce her to the local nightlife. They were supposed to meet friends at Finnegan's Bar, but Cicely wasn't feeling well due to a fever and decided to stay home. Daylene went to the bar alone and was expected to return by 1 a.m. However, when 1 a.m. came and Daylene hadn't returned, her Aunt Maggie became concerned. She tried calling Daylene multiple times but received no response. She stayed up all night, repeatedly calling Daylene's phone, but there was still no answer. At first, she thought Daylene might have stayed overnight at a friend's house. By morning, not seeing any sign of her niece, she decided to contact the police and report her missing. The police took Maggie's report but initially hoped that Daylene had simply stayed with friends and would return soon. Meanwhile, Daylene's family took action, spreading the word of her disappearance on social media and urging anyone with information to come forward. Her unexplained absence was highly unusual, leading the family to fear that something terrible might have occurred. On August 8, 2011, the day after Daylene's disappearance, the police officially launched an investigation. Detectives began by visiting Maggie's house. They searched Daylene's room, interviewed family members, and worked to rule out the possibility of family involvement in her disappearance. Daylene was a typical American girl, young, attractive, and full of dreams for the future. Her sudden disappearance was alarming and out of character. Detectives searched her room but found no signs suggesting she had run away. All her belongings, including important documents, were still there. A photo taken by Cicely on the night of her disappearance showed her wearing a brown and white striped top and ripped jeans. According to Cicely, she had planned to visit Finnegan's Bar that evening, a place they often went to together. The next step for the detectives was to visit Finnegan's Bar and interview the staff to gather more information. The bar manager recalled seeing Daylene outside on the street around midnight on the night she vanished. He reviewed the incident of the evening but didn't notice anything unusual. The bar had 2 functional security cameras that recorded hours of footage from Saturday night, footage the detectives hoped would provide crucial leads. Since reviewing all the footage would take time, the detectives obtained a copy to analyze at the police station. They aimed to identify whom Daylene interacted with and, most importantly, whom she left the bar with. Initially, the footage didn't reveal anything unusual. It captured typical scenes of young people gathered outside the bar, talking, smoking, and enjoying their night. However, one young woman stood out because of her brown and white striped top, which matched what Daylene had been wearing. Upon closer inspection, the detectives confirmed that the woman was indeed Daylene. They carefully tracked her movements on camera to piece together what happened. At 12:41 a.m., she was seen re-entering the bar. Another surveillance camera, located in the hallway near the restrooms, captured additional footage of her movements, which the detectives reviewed next. At 12:47 a.m., 6 minutes after re-entering the bar, Daylene appeared on the hallway surveillance footage. She was drinking and seemed at ease, though perhaps slightly vulnerable. She was the only woman in a hallway surrounded by several young men, making everyone in the footage either a potential suspect or a witness. The surveillance video showed Daylene looking happy and relaxed until a young man entered the frame at 12:48 a.m. The man approached her from behind and placed his arm around her waist. Shortly after that, she walked into the restroom. The man, who had a goatee and wore a backward cap, lingered further down the hallway. Daylene didn't appear noticeably upset by his presence, nor did she appear particularly pleased to see him. After reviewing the footage, detectives recognized the need to identify the man in question. They spoke again with Daylene's family and friends to gather more details. Through these conversations, they discovered that the man seen putting his arm around Daylene was Jason Gilley. Daylene, Cicely, and their group of friends were familiar with Jason and frequently attended social events at his house. Detectives soon located Jason's home to question him about the night Daylene vanished. Jason told detectives that he had spent the evening at the bar with Daylene and initially planned to take her home. However, he claimed he left early due to an emergency. His young son was sick. He stated he left the bar around 1 a.m. and arrived home by 1:30 a.m. He also revealed the name of another person who might be significant, Jacob Evangelisti. According to Jason, Daylene was dating Jacob, but they had a heated argument in his presence just 4 days before she disappeared. This detail caught the detectives' attention, as jealousy often plays a role in impulsive or harmful actions. They decided to investigate Jacob Evangelisti further to determine if he could provide additional information. Investigators found recent photos of Jacob on Daylene's social media pages, prompting them to review the bar's security footage again to see if Jacob was present. They focused on footage from 10:06 p.m. when Daylene exited the restroom. She stepped outside and approached a man leaning against the wall. Her demeanor suddenly shifted. She began gesturing aggressively and appeared visibly angry. Detectives tried to determine if the man was Jacob, but glare from the bright lights made his face unclear. After a brief exchange, Daylene walked away. The detectives continued examining the footage until the man turned toward the camera, confirming his identity as Jacob. Jacob was brought in for questioning. During the interview, he appeared noticeably anxious. When asked about his relationship with Daylene and the last time he saw her, Jacob explained that their final encounter was at Finnegan's bar. According to Jacob, Daylene broke up with him that night, which upset him deeply because he didn't want the relationship to end. He claimed that Daylene eventually left the bar without him and insisted he had no involvement in her disappearance. The detectives reviewed CCTV footage to verify Jacob's story. At 1:09 a.m., Jacob entered the bar. A few minutes later, Daylene appeared on camera. She seemed to be saying goodbye to one of the customers, and by 1:15 a.m., she was no longer visible. The detectives continued watching the footage until the bar closed and all the customers had left. By 2:38 a.m., the lights were off, and the parking lot was nearly empty. Neither Daylene nor Jacob appeared on the footage again. At this stage, suspicion fell on Jacob's potential involvement in Daylene's disappearance, as he may still have been upset over their breakup. However, there was no concrete evidence of foul play. Meanwhile, Daylene's family launched their own search efforts. They created and distributed flyers throughout the city, hoping that someone might have seen Daylene after she left the bar or had information about what had happened to her. At the Stockton Police Department, detectives questioned Jacob again about Daylene's disappearance. He continued to deny knowing anything, but this time, he mentioned a new name, James Cozens. Jacob claimed that James was Daylene's new boyfriend. Although James wasn't officially her boyfriend, the two were romantically involved. Things are further complicated when James is Jason Gilley's best friend and roommate. The timing of Daylene's relationship with James and her sudden disappearance raised suspicions about James and whether he could have been involved in what happened to her. Detectives brought James to the station to discuss his relationship with Daylene. He admitted that they had been seeing each other but insisted he knew nothing about the night she visited the bar, claiming that he was out of the city at the time. While the police were verifying his alibi, he revealed something important. On the night Daylene disappeared, she sent him a text saying she was with a new guy. He showed detectives the messages on his phone, which included one from Daylene mentioning that she was leaving the bar to attend a friend's party. Although the identity of the friend remained unknown, detectives developed a new theory. Daylene might have been looking to continue the night's festivities, possibly stopping at a liquor store or a grocery store on the way. Investigators created a list of nearby 24-hour liquor stores, with the closest one to Finnegan's being Food 4 Less. Detectives visited the store and discovered it had security cameras both inside and outside. If Daylene had been there, the cameras would have captured her on video. The detectives began reviewing footage from the store's outdoor security camera, and their instincts proved correct. The video showed Daylene entering the store with a young man, but his face wasn't visible, as the footage only captured his back. Unable to identify him, the detectives reviewed footage from other cameras. Soon, they spotted Daylene and the man purchasing what appeared to be a bottle of alcohol. They then turned back to the exterior camera footage to wait for the pair to leave the store. At 1:31 a.m., Daleen and her companion exited the store, and this time, the man's appearance was clearer. His backward baseball cap and goatee matched the description of Jason Gilley, whose face had earlier been identified in footage from Finnegan's Bar. This discovery gave the detectives a fresh lead. Jason had previously told investigators that he left the bar alone and was home by 1:30 a.m., taking care of his sick son. However, they now had clear evidence showing him leaving the liquor store with Daleen at 1:31 a.m. The lie about leaving the bar alone instantly made Jason their prime suspect. 1 week after Daleen's disappearance, the police arrested Jason. After his arrest, detectives waited an hour to observe Jason's behavior before beginning the interrogation. Without mentioning the security footage, they revisited Jason's account of the night, asking him again when he returned home from the bar. Jason repeated his lie, claiming he left around 1 a.m. to check on his sick son after receiving a text message from his grandmother. At this point, detectives confronted him, revealing that they had spoken to his grandmother, who denied sending him any messages that night. Jason admitted that his grandmother hadn't contacted him and claimed that he went home alone to be with his son. When asked who he left with, he repeatedly insisted he left alone and went straight home. Detectives caught on to his lies, realizing he was trapping himself in contradictions. They informed him they had surveillance footage disproving his statements. At this point, Jason changed his story, admitting he left the bar with Daleen, went to Food for Less, and bought her a bottle of Jägermeister, but he claimed he drove her back to the bar before heading home. When asked why he initially lied about leaving with Daleen, he said it had slipped his mind. Jason then explained that he had invited Daleen to spend the night on his couch, and she agreed. He admitted they drank the bottle of Jägermeister together and engaged in intimate contact. Afterward, she became upset, said it was a mistake, and decided to walk home. Through tears, Jason shared another version of events, stating that early Sunday morning, while giving Daleen a ride home, they had an argument. He claimed he used his grandmother's car to pick Daleen up near his house. During the 30 to 45-minute drive, Daleen was angry, repeatedly demanded to be let out of the car, and accused Jason of being a horrible person and a piece of garbage. As Jason pulled over, Daleen allegedly got out of the car and ran away. He said that was the last time he saw her. After recounting this story, Jason asked for a lawyer, effectively ending the interview. With insufficient evidence to charge him, the police had no choice but to release him. A few days later, on August 22nd, Jason went to the police station to report his wallet as lost or stolen. Detectives investigating Daleen's disappearance were surprised to see him there. Detective Robert Fain approached Jason and suggested they retrace the route he had taken on the day Daleen disappeared. Jason agreed and led the detective to the spot where he claimed Daleen had jumped out of the car and run away. When the detective asked why Jason hadn't tried to stop her, he explained that a car behind him was honking, so he got back on the freeway. Jason said he had looked for Daleen for 10 to 15 minutes but had to stop because he was running low on gas. He mentioned that he then drove to a gas station on Arch Road in Stockton. Using this information, the detective decided to investigate the gas station. Fortunately, the station had surveillance cameras. The camera footage revealed that Jason arrived at the gas station near the Arch Road exit on Highway 99 in Stockton at 10:46 a.m. on August 7, 2011. He was alone. This was 9 hours and 2 minutes after surveillance footage had captured Jason and Daleen together at a liquor store. At first, Jason's behavior at the gas station appeared normal, but one detail stood out. He looked disheveled, with dirt on his arms and shirt. At one point, the video showed him brushing dirt off his shoulders, which seemed suspicious. He then walked back to his car. Before leaving the station, he checked the passenger door, got into the car, reopened the passenger door about 20 seconds later, and quickly slammed it shut. According to Jason, Daleen was the last person to use that door. Finally, he drove off. After reviewing the footage, detectives developed a new theory. They suspected that Jason had taken Daleen to a field south of Stockton, where he dragged her out of the car in such a rush that the passenger door didn't close completely. They believed Daleen was no longer alive but needed concrete evidence to confirm her death before arresting Jason. Meanwhile, he remained at large, continuing to speak to reporters while Daleen's whereabouts remained unknown. On October 15, 2011, more than 2 months after Daleen's disappearance, there was a major breakthrough in the case. A farmer discovered human remains in a cornfield 20 miles outside of Stockton. Court documents later confirmed that the remains belonged to Daleen and were located approximately 64 feet from Lone Tree Road in Escalon. Sarah Yoshida, a senior criminalist with the Department of Justice, was dispatched to investigate the scene. That afternoon, Sarah found numerous human bones, including a skull, jaw, ribs, vertebrae, foot bones, and leg bones. A torso and a clump of hair were also recovered. Additionally, a black bra was discovered between the remains and a nearby road. Investigators also found 5 shell casings southeast of where the body was located. Later that evening, at around 9 p.m., Dr. Bennett Omalu, a medical examiner for San Joaquin County, arrived at the scene. He requested the soil beneath the body be excavated. 18 inches of soil were removed, placed in a body bag, and then x-rayed, revealing 2 bullets buried in the dirt. Bennett performed an autopsy on Daleen's remains and concluded that she had been shot in the cornfield where her body was found. The bullets had either passed through her body and embedded in the soil beneath or fallen out as her body decomposed. There was a gunshot wound to the back of her head. Her fingers, fingernails, and jewelry were tangled in her hair, which suggested that her hands were near her head when she was shot. The cause of her death was determined to be a gunshot wound to the head, with additional gunshot wounds to her torso contributing to her death. Based on the level of decomposition, Bennett concluded that Daleen had likely died on August 7, 2011. Investigators quickly identified Jason Gilley as the prime suspect. He had access to a Jennings semi-automatic handgun owned by a family member. The weapon was seized, and ballistic testing conclusively proved that it was used to kill Daleen. As a result, he was arrested, and investigators started piecing together the events from the night of Daleen's disappearance. On the evening of Saturday, August 6, 2011, Daleen went to a bar to meet friends, including Jason. At some point during the evening, he persuaded her to go to his house. On their way, they stopped at a liquor store, which was the last location where Daleen was seen alive. Security footage from the store showed no signs of anything unusual. However, after they left the store, events took a tragic turn that ultimately led to Daleen's death. When Daleen's body was discovered, she was naked. Investigators suspected that she may have rejected Jason's advances, prompting him to force himself on her. Although this was considered the most plausible motive, the advanced decomposition of Daleen's body made confirmation impossible. Authorities speculated that when she threatened to report Jason to the police, he forced her into his car, drove far beyond her home, and ultimately killed her in a remote field. In November 2013, Jason Gilley was convicted of Daleen Carlson's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He later attempted to appeal the sentence, but his efforts were unsuccessful. In 2016, 22-year-old Julia Enright was studying at the Massachusetts Medical College in the USA. At that time, she met a young man named Brandon Chicklese, who was 18. Brandon was a technology student, fulfilling his dream of becoming a heating and ventilation technician. Julia and Brandon were completely different from each other. Julia dressed and behaved as differently as possible, whereas Brandon dressed modestly and was kind and calm. Brandon grew up surrounded and cared for by his parents. He had been a Boy Scout for over 10 years, was described by those who knew him well as responsive and open. When he and Julia started dating, their union seemed like a real attraction of opposites. Gradually, they began an intimate relationship, and Julia involved Brandon in unusual forms of intimacy. Given their age, it was not easy to find privacy for such experiments, so Julia suggested using a treehouse owned by one of her friends. The house was abandoned and located in a wooded area just a few kilometers away from the suburban homes where Julia was born and raised. Over time, the owner stopped visiting the secluded place, and Julia began to use the house freely. She decorated her improvised shelter with chains and other paraphernalia, turning it into a base for their experiments. Her collection of unique objects began to form there. By the time Brandon first visited this place, an eerie atmosphere pervaded it, inspiring dark thoughts. However, he tolerated the oddities of his girlfriend, and they regularly met there. But as their relationship developed, Brandon increasingly felt that they were not right for each other. Eventually, he realized that further development of their relationship was impossible. Brandon suggested breaking up and remaining friends. Julia agreed. It seemed that both of them calmly separated, demonstrating emotional maturity. In 2018, Brandon lived with his parents in the small town of Rindge, New Hampshire. He had obtained the qualification for which he had studied and worked so long, becoming a heating engineer. He started dating another girl and was preparing to celebrate his birthday in July. It seemed that, despite his young age, he had managed to achieve something significant. He had an education, a stable job, and a relationship with a girl. He sincerely told his family that he felt happier than ever. Shortly before this period, Brandon thought he had gained the necessary experience and was ready to open his own business in heating systems. He began to take action, and everyone gave him great support for this initiative. Relatives, friends, and his girlfriend all recognized that Brandon was just the type of person who could successfully run his own business. Unfortunately, it was not destined for him to realize these dreams. On June 23, 2018, Brandon left home to visit relatives in Windham, New Hampshire. For this, he had to travel about 80 kilometers, just over an hour's journey. He left home at around 1 p.m., but he did not return to his relatives by evening. Any attempts to contact him were ignored. His family, girlfriend, and grandmother were understandably panicking. This behavior was completely uncharacteristic of Brandon. His mobile phone was turned off, a situation he had never experienced before, as he had a busy schedule and could receive calls from new clients at any moment. Unfortunately, in order to contact the authorities to report a missing person, they had to wait at least a day. On the morning of June 24th, Brandon's parents went to the police station. They presented their arguments in detail and were very worried because Brandon was not prone to spontaneous parties or meetings with friends, did not suffer from any mental problems. Generally should not have disappeared anywhere. Law enforcement began to search for traces of Brandon in Windham. However, despite their efforts, they could find no evidence that he had even reached the city. There were no traces of his car, including on recordings from CCTV cameras. Brandon did not buy anything in Windham, did not pay for gas with his card, and did not use his phone. In this state of having no leads, 5 days passed. Family members searched for him, but increasingly, the thought that they would not see their loved one again haunted them. Finally, on June 29th, a gray Honda Civic was found in the parking lot of the Hannaford supermarket on Route 202 in Rindge, New Hampshire. It was Brandon's car. It was unclear how the car appeared there, especially since it was unlocked and the keys were left in the ignition. This only strengthened the suspicion that something terrible had occurred. Brandon would never have treated his property this way. Such methods are often used by criminals to provoke the theft of a vehicle, leaving fingerprints behind to set up innocent people. During this time, relatives continued their search, distributing, pasting flyers throughout Brandon's hometown and the surrounding area. Unfortunately, all these efforts were in vain. On July 10, 2018, a random runner training in a forested area in Rindge made a horrifying discovery just 10 kilometers from the shopping center where Brandon's car was found. He located a human body, which was hidden in the bushes only tens of meters from the side of the highway. The remains of the young man were wrapped in tarpaulin, and his hands and feet were bound with tape. Given the condition of the body at the time of discovery, most of the flesh had rotted away, exposing the bones. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they immediately stated that this method of hiding the body was not chosen by chance. In fact, Such extensive decomposition is an extremely effective way to get rid of evidence in the shortest possible time. Autopsy results showed the victim was Brandon Chicklese. It was believed that the detectives were dealing with a fairly experienced killer who knew how to evade justice. The perpetrator probably carefully studied related materials, and perhaps this was not his first crime. Suspicion only increased when investigators managed to find the shirt that Brandon had been wearing. It had several distinct cuts, apparently from a knife. Judging by this item of clothing, the victim had been stabbed 12 times. Unfortunately, the forensic expert could not confirm all of these wounds due to the body's condition. Perhaps they were more due to the high degree of decomposition. Thus, the expert could only speak with certainty about the traces left on the bones. For the same reason, it was not possible to establish the exact cause of death. It was possible that Brandon was tortured, but proving or disproving such guesses turned out to be impossible. No matter how hard the investigators tried, they were unable to find his mobile phone. It was apparently destroyed or discarded. Since the moment of Brandon's disappearance, they could not connect to his means of communication. This only confirmed the idea that the crime was committed by an experienced killer who knew that any information carriers and means of communication were compromising. This strategy was effective, as the police could not even establish the route Brandon had taken before his death or after the murder. Fortunately, the detectives still had access to the list of calls from Brandon's mobile phone before it was turned off. When they received this information from the operator, they discovered that the last call before his disappearance and the switching off of his mobile phone was made near the home of his ex-girlfriend, Julia. Investigators assumed he could have visited her before leaving. As soon as the patrol officers arrived near Julia's house, they immediately suspected something was wrong. There was an unbearable smell of rotting flesh. Even more shocking discoveries awaited within the house. Officers found decomposing bodies of animals literally everywhere in the rooms. Outside, they were wrapped in tarpaulin, and inside, in various containers, there were BDSM kits, specific paraphernalia, knives, and related photos. In fact, this house became the most horrifying location in the memory of all the participants of the first encounter with Julia. Julia lived alone in her father's house. She worked as a phlebotomist in a clinical laboratory, dealing with blood, collecting it for analysis, and preparing samples. Given the respect that doctors receive in the USA, it was a rather esteemed profession. Julia was always a peculiar person. As it turned out, these quirks went far beyond the bounds of normalcy. Her work was not just a way for her to help people and earn a living, it became something much more. During the day, she worked as a phlebotomist, but at night, she turned into another person. She became quite famous in the escort industry, acting as a mistress. Her friends and acquaintances knew of Julia's BDSM fetish, which she openly discussed. She claimed that only willing participants were involved in her activities, insisting that it was a form of entertainment and that all clients left satisfied. However, none of her acquaintances suspected the dangers involved. Despite her fears and risks, she decided to take a big step, even posting an ad on a specialized website inviting everyone to engage in play involving knives and blood. According to the description, it was supposed to be BDSM domination, which involved lightly injuring the client and allowing them to bleed. This was a specific category of entertainment. There would always be clients willing to participate. Moreover, no one should care about what happens in someone else's bed if it is done by mutual consent. However, such activities always suspiciously resemble a front to cover up darker deeds or even a trap for naive partners. As it turned out, Julia had her own skeletons in the closet. She didn't just associate her life with blood, it was more akin to an obsession. In fact, she had a fascination not only with blood but also with dead flesh. She had a real collection of dead animals displayed in jars, among them large specimens like ravens. Additionally, almost constantly in her courtyard lay decomposing animal bodies, which she wrapped in tarpaulin to speed up decomposition from the heat and then used their bones for her artistic compositions. Despite the nightmarish aspects and especially the terrible smell, Julia perceived some sort of beauty in this and embodied it through her art. Unfortunately, her vision of beauty proved too perverse and cruel to earn her a place among artists. Moreover, Julia had a whole collection of vials filled with blood and used condoms. She was obsessed with serial killers. She once even described a kind of ritual in which she personally participated. When a whole group of people gathered, they acted out scenes with vampires and actually drank some of each other's blood. Despite these suspicious hobbies, Julia had friends and willingly demonstrated her creativity. She always claimed that she had no talent in art, but in this way, she expressed her vision of the world. In fact, time and time again, Julia showed her friends the remains of animals, which were laid out in specific patterns. Of course, most people were concerned about where she got all these bodies. To such questions, Julia always answered briefly that everything necessary for this so-called art was found in a forest or on the side of the road. Julia insisted that she did not harm living beings but found and used the bodies of dead animals. Considering that in everyday life she was very quiet and avoided conflicts, people believed that this was just an oddity. Apparently, Julia's inner circle didn't know about Jeffrey Dahmer. This infamous man once started with a similar fixation. He also collected dead animals and became obsessed with the study of remains. He described his passion as an alternative vision of the world or creativity. Like Julia, Dahmer surrounded himself with things of a frankly creepy nature, and naturally, this could not end well. Julia kept a detailed diary in which she described her life and her activities exploring her own psyche. It seemed she was not fully aware that her hobbies looked strange and provocative. She continued to view them as creative pursuits and spoke somewhat arrogantly about people who did not understand art and beauty. However, there were less philosophical notes in the diary. She described bloodthirstiness as a charming character trait and revealed her unhealthy attitude toward death. From the very first entry, she constantly talked about her obsessive desire to kill a person. Julia considered it the height of bloodthirstiness, a manifestation of insatiability, which excited and attracted her. Julia repeatedly mentioned that she was driven to this monstrous act by a certain hunger that arose with every thought of killing a person. All this frightening data was obtained during the investigation. The longer the police dug to understand who Julia was, the more shocked they became. For the detectives, it became obvious that they had encountered a potential serial killer. The biggest source of incriminating data was her mobile phone, which was taken for examination. As it turned out, shortly before Brandon's disappearance, Julia had met a new boyfriend named Jonathan Lind. They were both rather dark personalities, making them perfectly suited for each other. The night before Brandon's disappearance, immediately after the incident, Julia sent Jonathan a message containing the alarming phrase, "bloodbath." Detectives immediately noted that the treatment of Brandon's body was identical to the method Julia had used to accelerate the decomposition of animal remains. Even more unusual was the message sent to Brandon the day before his disappearance, in which Julia asked if he would come to visit her treehouse. The investigation established that a few weeks before her death, Julia was actively trying to improve her relationship with her ex since there were difficulties with the current girlfriend of Brandon. In fact, they were on the verge of breaking up due to her betrayal. Probably as a result of this, Julia managed to draw him in. In the end, he agreed to meet her at a kind of BDSM club, perhaps thinking of this visit to his ex as an act of reconciliation. Immediately after Brandon agreed to Julia's invitation, she wrote to her new boyfriend Jonathan that there was a surprise for him. By communicating with the neighbors of Julia, the police easily uncovered details of her intimate relationships and preferences. She openly shared this information with the entire neighborhood and seemed to even speak with pride about her activities in the intimate sphere. Gradually, the detectives came into possession of a business card on which she suggested playing with a knife and blood. There were witnesses who testified that Julia and her new boyfriend liked to cut each other during intimate. However, she herself would discuss it openly without the slightest embarrassment. When she ended up at the station for questioning, she laid out all the details. Surprisingly, after this conversation with Julia, the police officers let her go. She managed to convince them that despite her oddities, she was not involved in the murders and that there was no concrete evidence against her. According to Julia's confession, she truly intended to meet Brandon on that fateful day, but he never showed up. She sent him a message in the evening, but the guy never responded. Finally, One of the police officers decided to verify the information and found other messages from Brandon that Julia had not mentioned. Those messages made it clear that the former lovers had indeed met. This fleeting lie raised suspicions that the detectives had encountered a manipulative individual who needed to be further investigated. These guesses turned out to be correct. The more the police talked to Julia, the more she changed her story. Eventually, she admitted that she did meet with Brandon that evening. According to her, after a short conversation, he left to buy banned substances for the night, but the guy never returned and did not answer her calls, so she just went home. This also turned out to be a lie, as the guy did not use banned substances. After the lie was revealed, the detective spoke to the neighbors of Julia again, and they found out about the treehouse in the woods that Julia had turned into a BDSM headquarters. The officers focused on finding this hideout and managed to arrive there with her new boyfriend. It was obvious that the house had been thoroughly cleaned. There was even new furniture and a new carpet. Everything looked suspicious, as if someone had tried to cover up evidence of a crime. The carpet attracted the most attention. It looked out of place in this treehouse, as did the cleanliness, especially in sharp contrast to the chains and jars of blood and animal bodies. As soon as the carpet was lifted, it became evident that it was covering very large, washed-out blood stains. Similar traces were found under the floorboards. Blood also was on the steps and tree trunks. They had obviously tried to wash it off, but in vain, so they simply covered it with a carpet. It resembled a bloodbath. Judging by the number and size of these marks, it was clear that they were related to a deceased victim. Julia insisted that all these traces belonged to dead animals she had collected on the street. After searching the car, blood was also found there. Julia denied that Brandon was ever in the car or that they met in the treehouse on the day of the disappearance. However, DNA testing showed that she was lying, as most of the traces belonged to Brandon. As soon as the detectives presented this evidence, she changed her story again. Julia claimed that after her meeting with Brandon, they got very drunk. He went to get banned substances, and then they met in the treehouse. According to her confession, her ex-boyfriend attacked her, demanding intimate, but Julia resisted, justifying herself by saying that she had a new boyfriend. However, this did not help, as Brandon attacked and tried to abuse her. According to her, at that moment, she had no choice. Julia managed to reach for a knife, which she always carried on her belt. She claimed to have stabbed Brandon several times in self-defense. Afterward, Julia, in a state of shock, admitted that she could not even move from the spot, so she remained beside the wounded Brandon for about 40 minutes. During this time, he simply bled out. Julia did not call for help or contact the police. Instead, she turned to her boyfriend to ask for assistance in getting rid of the body. She did not want to go to jail for self-defense, believing that they would not believe her. By this point, investigators no longer believed a word she said. Additionally, the more than a dozen blows found only on the shirt were too much for self-defense. Her story about needing help from her new boyfriend was questionable, as he was known to be a sadist. It is unlikely that he was brought in solely to assist with getting rid of the body. Most likely, he also participated in the crime. However, no solid evidence was found. Julia ended her story by explaining how the body was wrapped in a tarpaulin and discarded off the highway. She insisted that the fabric was used only to disguise the remains. The police were convinced that she could have deliberately used a proven method to conceal human bones to fulfill her morbid fantasies. After all, maniacs are often prone to collecting items that remind them of their crimes. Julia's behavior did not resemble self-defense but clearly indicated an attempt to escape justice. Julia and Jonathan not only disposed of the body but also destroyed Brandon's mobile phone, attempted to eliminate traces of blood in the treehouse. They covered for each other when communicating with the authorities. There were no signs of struggle on Julia, and she was not morally traumatized by the events. Immediately after they disposed of the body, she and Jonathan simply went out for sushi. The detectives were finally able to confirm their suspicions after reviewing Julia's diaries. Judging by the last entries, she perceived Brandon's murder as a kind of gift for her new lover, who shared her peculiarities. Jonathan actively denied his involvement, insisting that he did not report the incident to law enforcement because Julia was scared and convinced him not to do so. She was absolutely certain that she would avoid punishment, as expressed in her diary in a rather crude manner. Additionally, Julia wrote that the torture and murder gave her body pleasure. It is evident that she would not have stopped there. In fact, each subsequent entry in the diary was more alarming than the last. The notes fully revealed the true nature of her interests. Julia repeatedly robbed graves and brought bones to add to her disturbing collection, which her boyfriend seemed not to be bothered by at all. In the first trial, Julia was charged with first-degree murder, and despite the overwhelming amount of evidence against her, she continued to insist that she was the victim of abuse. After her arrest, Jonathan, who was detained 2 weeks later, was charged with concealing evidence of a crime and perjury. He also did not admit guilt. Both were imprisoned and denied bail while awaiting trial. Julia's first trial was scheduled for November 2021. The prosecution insisted that the defendant planned Brandon Chiklis' murder as an act of togetherness and a way to fulfill her vicious desires. Julia easily managed to lure him into a trap by promising intimate. Presumably, she brutally dealt with Brandon, then enlisted her new boyfriend to help get rid of the body and the traces of torture. Julia's deviant interests exceeded all reasonable limits. Shortly before Brandon's murder, she went to a family planning clinic to have an abortion. The staff confirmed that she persistently requested to keep the fetus, even attempting to bribe the doctors to allow her to take the unborn child home. It is obvious that the fetus would have become another exhibit in her collection. Of course, the lawyer tried his best to whitewash the image of the defendant and her accomplice. However, considering all the accumulated evidence, this proved to be quite difficult. Their only tactic was to smear the name of Brandon. The defense attorney tried to argue that Brandon was an abuse and a cruel, aggressive person, but all of this sounded extremely unconvincing. When Julia spoke at the trial, she cried while recounting how she was attacked by Brandon. She claimed that she managed to defend her honor only after she stabbed him in the throat, but she could not explain why she inflicted many other wounds. Despite the desperate attempts of the lawyer to defend her, the prosecution successfully painted a truly horrific image of Julia. The jury was adamant and found Julia Enrights guilty, not of first-degree murder, but of second-degree murder, considering it an unintentional crime. In March 2022, the court announced the sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Upon hearing this decision, Julia burst into tears again, tearfully expressing that not a day goes by that she does not regret meeting Brandon. Julia never admitted guilt, calling the outcome of the trial a misunderstanding. Jonathan Lind, found guilty of giving false testimony, was sentenced to imprisonment for a term of 7 to 9 years. Born on May 20, 1998, in Louisville, Colorado, Ashley Doolittle discovered her love for horses at the age of 5. Growing up in a supportive family and following her dreams, she always aspired to be a role model in her community, like many other young girls. Ashley was raised by her parents, Anne Marie and Jeff Doolittle, along with her 2 brothers, Brandon and Michael. From an early age, her vibrant personality attracted people to her. By the time she was 5, she had her first pony, igniting a lifelong passion for horseback riding that became a key part of her identity. Her love for horses and the sense of community she found in this world gave her purpose. A few years later, at the age of 8, she began attending horse shows and immediately fell in love with the community atmosphere and rodeo lifestyle. She actively participated in rodeo events and achieved many accomplishments. In 2016, at around 18 years old, she was honored with the title of Lady-in-Waiting, a respected position in the rodeo community. This role involved assisting the rodeo queen and entailed various responsibilities, such as organizing fundraisers, supporting sponsors, attending community events, and representing the event as a spokesperson. Receiving this title was a great honor for Ashley, bringing her one step closer to her ultimate goal of becoming rodeo queen. Ashley became well known for her dedication to the rodeo community, and many teenage girls looked up to her as a role model. Young girls often asked Ashley for her autograph, and she always wrote personal letters to each one, encouraging them to pursue their dreams. In addition, she was actively involved in the Boulder County 4-H horse program, inspiring young children to participate in horseback riding. Ashley competed on various horse judging teams, participated in horse shows, and earned the title of Champion High Individual at the National 4-H Western Roundup. But Ashley had even bigger ambitions. She is a founding member and has served as vice president for 2 terms of the Thomas Valley FFA, the Future Farmers of America. FFA is an organization that supports individuals intending to enter and lead in the agricultural field. During her time there, she has been involved in many activities and plans to pursue FFA at the state level when she begins college. She graduated from Berthoud High in May 2016 and intended to attend Colorado State University, majoring in agricultural business. She looked forward to the next chapter of her life, unaware that it would be disrupted in a tragic way. Her life was devastated by one person, Tanner Flores, who believed that if he couldn't be with her, no one else should have her. Ashley met Tanner in high school, and their relationship seemed like a typical teenage romance to outsiders. However, they faced challenges. Tanner was controlling and dictated what she could and could not do. He even forbade her from attending college parties, which seemed absurd since Ashley was not the type to party. Was Tanner simply jealous of Ashley's accomplishments? Did he want to possess her completely? Was he insecure about losing her to someone better? Regardless of his motivations, Tanner frequently expressed his personal insecurities through his treatment of Ashley. After a year of dating, she realized he was not the right person for her and decided to break up with him. However, this decision was not easy for Tanner to accept. On June 4, 2016, he suggested they go hiking in Estes Park to discuss their relationship. Although Ashley tried to communicate that they were no longer together, Tanner mistakenly thought the conversation had gone well and believed they had reconciled. The next day, Ashley went out with friends to the Sundance Steakhouse, where Tanner unexpectedly showed up. Witnesses reported that he grabbed her, tried to turn her to face him, and attempted to talk, but she was done with his behavior and left. The next day, he convinced her to meet at Lon Hagler Reservoir to talk again. Despite her clearly stating that they were not back together, he somehow believed they had resumed their relationship. The day after that, Ashley returned to the Sundance Steakhouse and even reached out to Tanner, asking him not to come because she didn't want to see him. Tanner, however, made up a story saying he was locked out of his truck and needed her help. Ashley ignored his message. For days after their hike, on June 8, Ashley reluctantly agreed to accompany Tanner to sell some scrap metal, unaware that this decision would lead to a horrific incident in her life. On that day, Tanner checked Ashley's phone and found out that she had been texting 2 other guys, Tori and Jared. He suspected Ashley of flirting with them and accused her of being unfaithful, even though they were not officially in a relationship at the time. Later that night, he reached out to the 2 guys, which made Ashley very angry. He then sent her a text in which he expressed his hope that she realized what she had lost, stating that he had done everything for her and spent so much money. He warned her that he was going to do something reckless and then ended the message with a bye. Ashley tries to protect herself and still wants to maintain her friendship with Tanner, even though things have become tense. The next day, he messaged her again, asking if they could meet up and talk. She told him she was in Denver that morning but could meet later. While Ashley was in Denver, Tanner borrowed his dad's gun and went to shoot at Carter Lake, claiming it helped him relax. He continued to text Ashley throughout the day and even mentioned that he missed her. Frustrated, Ashley texted him to stop but still planned to meet him later because she didn't want to be rude. On the afternoon of June 9th, they met at Lon Hagler Reservoir, where Ashley got into Tanner's truck, unaware it would be the last thing she ever did. Around 7:30 p.m., her parents started looking for her since she hadn't come home. At 8 p.m., they found her car in a parking space at the reservoir. Both of her parents, Jeff and Ann, are confident that she will text them if she plans to come home late. Given this, they concluded that something wasn't right and immediately called the sheriff's office to report her missing. Local authorities quickly got involved and began their search. They contacted Ashley's friends and family for information. During this process, a name that came up repeatedly was Tanner. Authorities discovered that Tanner and Ashley had been in a relationship but had since broken up. They learned that Tanner was very upset about the breakup. One person mentioned that he posted a Snapchat message that raised concerns about his mental health, leading to fears that he might be thinking about ending his life. Many others interviewed by the authorities also noted that they had never seen Tanner this upset. Shortly thereafter, Tanner's father arrived and informed the officers that his .22 pistol was missing from the gun safe. He also stated that Tanner knew where the keys were located. Authorities issued a lookout alert for Tanner's truck and notified law enforcement across Colorado. The search was intensified, and by 8 a.m. the next day, they had located his position. Authorities received information that the truck had been seen at Tanner's grandfather's property in CB Bar, Colorado, which was about 5 hours away. Tanner's grandmother had called a neighbor to confirm the truck's presence, and upon verification, she reported it to the police. Due to the distance, organizing a team for an arrest would take some time, so authorities decided to send a wildlife ranger to the property to monitor Tanner and prevent his escape. Although Tanner did not attempt to flee, he engaged in disturbing behavior. The neighbor and the wildlife ranger witnessed him throwing blood-soaked rags into a nearby field and moving a roll-up mat behind the house. What happened next was horrifying. Tanner emerged from the house with a heavy blanket and placed it in the back seat of his truck. It was visibly heavy for him to carry, and a human arm was protruding from it. At this point, it was evident what Tanner had done. Fortunately, later that morning, he was arrested without incident by the sheriff's deputies, a CBI agent, and members of 3 other law enforcement agencies. When they opened the blanket in Tanner's truck, they discovered the body of Ashley. There was no way to save her, and her worst nightmare had come true. Tanner initially told the officers that he and Ashley were discussing their relationship in his truck when she lost control. He claimed that she had the gun, and while he was struggling to get it from her, it went off and accidentally killed her. He then stated that he shot her twice afterward to alleviate her suffering because the first shot did not kill her. After hearing this account, an officer expressed skepticism, and eventually, Tanner confessed the truth. Since Ashley had passed away by that time, Tanner was the only source for the details of the incident. He informed the officer that he and Ashley had met at Lon Hagler Reservoir, and then they drove west toward Carter Lake. This was the same lake Tanner had visited earlier that day to practice shooting. He mentioned that they talked about their relationship during their drive. Ashley expressed that she did not want to reconcile with him at that moment but saw the possibility of marrying him in the future. She needed time to explore other relationships. After this conversation, they began driving back to where Ashley's car was parked, but things took a dark turn. Tanner described how Ashley glared at him during the ride, which led him to reach into the back seat, grab the revolver, and attack her in the back of the head twice. He claimed that she did not die immediately, which is why he shot her a 3rd time, stating that it was meant to end her suffering. After that, he tried to clean her body as best as he could and drove to the land of his deceased grandfather in another part of the state. Once he provided his statement, he was taken to the Mesa County Jail without the option of bail. Ashley's funeral was held on June 17 at St. John Evangelist Catholic Parish in Loveland, Colorado. The ceremony was attended by over 700 people, including family, friends, and community members, all devastated by the tragic loss. The teenage girl, once a symbol of hope, happiness, and aspiration in the community, has now departed, leaving behind a profound sense of sorrow for everyone. Anne, Ashley's mother, expressed her wish for her daughter to be remembered for her vibrant life rather than for the way she passed away. She wanted Ashley's legacy to reflect the achievements of an energetic 18-year-old girl who had so much promise ahead of her. 18, many people often feel confused about determining their life direction, such as their passions, careers, or college choices, because there are so many options. However, this was not the case for Ashley. In fact, she excelled in almost every field she participated in. That was her identity. While many young people struggle to figure out their paths at this age, Ashley had a clear vision for her future. Tragically, no one anticipated that her plans would be interrupted. People who attended her funeral described her as being fun, cheerful, and approachable. She was poised to become the rodeo queen the following year, but instead, she will be remembered during the upcoming season. Ashley had made significant contributions to her community, making her funeral a large and meaningful event. On that day, in addition to the ceremony, the FBI announced it would be joining Larimer County in the investigation to assist with evidence collection and search efforts. Tanner, who had previously been in Mesa County Jail, was moved to Larimer County Jail on the same day Ashley was laid to rest. The Ashley family was now beginning its pursuit of justice. On June 20th, Tanner appeared in court for the first time, facing charges of first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping. The kidnapping charge stemmed from the allegation that Tanner would not allow Ashley to exit the truck when she attempted to do so. Following Ashley's funeral, her family would endure ongoing grief and suffering, yet they would have to wait a year and a half for legal proceedings to begin. In October 2017, the trial began, with both Tanner and Ashley's family and friends in attendance. It was evident to everyone that Tanner had killed Ashley. The central question was whether the act was premeditated. The prosecution argued that the murder was planned, claiming that Tanner had gone to the lake earlier that morning to test the revolver and find a secluded spot for the crime. The prosecution also noted that the revolver used in the murder was a single-action firearm, requiring manual resetting after each shot. Given that Ashley was shot 3 times, they argued this demonstrated deliberate intent rather than a spontaneous act. The defense, on the other hand, contended that it was not a planned murder and suggested that second-degree murder would be a more appropriate charge. During the trial, Tanner took the stand and described the incident in detail. He admitted to what he had done but denied any intention to kill Ashley. New information emerged during his testimony that had not been included in his initial statement after his arrest. He revealed that he had disposed of both their phones after the murder, but not before texting himself from Ashley's phone, claiming they were not together that afternoon and that she would not meet him. This seemed like a failed attempt to cover his tracks. One shocking revelation came when he disclosed that the night before his arrest, he had broken into his deceased grandfather's home. Once inside, he cleaned up some blood, turned on the TV, and watched cartoons before going to sleep. This bizarre behavior raised a question: how can someone claim to love another person so deeply yet have the capacity to murder them and then watch television afterwards? This remains an unfathomable mystery. At the conclusion of the trial, both families were left devastated by their loss, mourning their children and the futures they had envisioned. While the verdict brought some measure of justice for Ashley, it also marked a grim end for Tanner. The anguish felt by both families was unbearable. Though justice was served, no true winners emerged from this heartbreaking situation. Both families were irreparably damaged in the process. The case highlighted a significant issue: dating violence in the United States. Each year, approximately 1.5 million high school students experience physical violence from an intimate partner, and 1 in 3 teens aged 14 to 20 in the United States experiences dating violence. Alarmingly, 81% of parents do not consider teen dating violence to be a serious problem. And then Jeff Doolittle found that there was insufficient discussion about this reality, which sadly affected their daughter, as well as many other young people in the United States and beyond who face similar situations. In response, they established the Ashley Doolittle Foundation. This nonprofit aims to honor their daughter's legacy by giving back to the community as she once did. The foundation focuses on raising awareness and preventing teen dating violence, helping victims connect with appropriate support groups, launching school programs, and educating students and parents about the signs of dating violence. Ashley's mother emphasized that the foundation was created to keep Ashley's memory alive. She stated that they wanted something good to come from this through the Ashley Doolittle Foundation and that they wanted to prevent other families from experiencing what they went through. The story of Ashley serves as a serious reminder of the dangers that can exist in teenage relationships. While not every relationship mirrors the tragic events involving Tanner and Ashley, some do. It is crucial to recognize that violence, whether physical, verbal, or psychological, is unacceptable. Ignoring these issues can lead to severe consequences, as Ashley tragically experienced. Tanner Flores, the perpetrator, was found guilty of murder and second-degree kidnapping on October 4, 2017. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 32 years. Sharon Parker was born and raised in Florida, USA, in a family with several siblings, including 2 older brothers and an older sister. From a young age, she was very active, often attending concerts and participating in social events with her friends. Known for her stylish appearance, she always looked great. In 1976, at the age of 19, Sharon became pregnant and married her longtime boyfriend, whom she had known since school. Their relationship appeared loving and had stood the test of time. After their wedding, they moved to Alabama for her husband's job, where Sharon gave birth to a daughter named Heather. Excited about motherhood, Sharon was eager to be the best mother possible, but her husband did not share her enthusiasm. After Heather's birth, their marriage began to deteriorate. Her husband struggled with the changes, feeling jealous of the time Sharon spent caring for their baby. This ultimately led to their divorce 3 years later. Sharon returned to Florida with Heather, where her family lived. She settled in Fort Myers, close to them, and focused on raising her daughter while working. The father was largely indifferent to the child, so Sharon tried to compensate for the shortcomings in her daughter's life. Initially, Sharon found work as an assistant accountant at a local hospital. Realizing she needed support, she sought a new partner who could be a father figure for Heather and help her have more children. This hope came to fruition when her mother introduced her to Gary Parker, a builder who was studying to become an engineer. Sharon felt an instant connection, describing it as love at first sight. They quickly began a romantic relationship and married a few months later. A year after their wedding, Sharon became pregnant again and gave birth to twin boys, Jacob and Joshua. By that time, Heather was older and eagerly participated in taking care of her brothers, feeling proud to be an older sister and helping with their upbringing, especially when their mother was busy. The Parkers were a happy family. Gary is a good man. He always takes care of his wife's daughter and creates a loving environment for her. After the birth of their twins, Jacob and Joshua, their bond grew even stronger. They seemed to have the perfect family, enjoying barbecues on Sundays and camping in their backyard. It appeared as though they had a bright future ahead, filled with the joys of aging together and raising grandchildren. Unfortunately, their dreams would not come to fruition. Sharon was an excellent mother and a lively young wife who brought warmth and support to the family. As a homemaker, she managed the household while Gary worked to provide for them. They hadn't planned on having more children, but in the fall of 1989, Sharon announced that she was pregnant. They were overjoyed and eagerly anticipated the arrival of their new baby. On March 19, 1990, they welcomed a daughter named Julie. Sharon was thrilled, and Gary shared in her excitement. 10 days after Julie was born, the family planned a big celebration for their relatives and close friends. A large sign hung outside their house to announce that they had had another daughter. By this time, Jacob and Joshua were 6 years old, and Heather was already a high school student. Guests were expected to arrive on the evening of March 29, 1990. As usual, Gary and Sharon woke up that morning, took the kids to school, then Gary went to work while Sharon prepared for the party and cared for Julie. Jacob and Joshua were excited about the evening's events. Once their classes ended, they hurried home. However, as they approached the house, they found it unusually dark inside. Upon entering, they were met with an eerie silence. Their mother, Sharon, always greeted them at this time, often standing by the window to watch for them. She would help them take off their coats as part of their daily routine. So, when she didn't come out to greet them, the boys grew concerned. Initially, they thought she might be unwell and called for her, but there was no response. The boys began searching the house, and one of them soon spotted Sharon sitting motionless in a dark room. He called her name, but she remained silent. As they got closer, they touched her head, causing her to fall to the side. They saw that the right side of her head and face was covered in blood. Alarmed, they called for their baby sister, Julie, but she was nowhere to be found. Feeling distressed, the boys ran out onto the porch, uncertain about what to do next. Around the same time, 14-year-old Heather arrived home from school. She sensed that something was wrong when she saw her frightened twin brothers crying on the porch. They told her that their mother was in the house and hurt. Heather quickly went inside and was horrified to find Sharon, 33, lifeless in a chair with dried blood on her head. Frantically, Heather searched for Julie, but the baby was not there. Confused and panicked, she tried to call emergency services, but the home phone was disconnected. Leaving her brothers on the porch with instructions to stay put, she ran to a neighbor's house to call for help. Initially doubtful, the neighbor ultimately called the police. Soon after, several police cars arrived at their home and began investigating the scene. After Heather called the police, she contacted Gary. He asked for time off from work and went home. Investigators found that the locks and windows were undamaged, suggesting that either Sharon knew her attacker and let them in willingly or that the attacker had a key. Sharon was attacked from behind at close range. The scene was particularly chilling, with her sitting in a chair, her legs crossed and her hands resting on her knees, making it appear as though she was conversing with someone. This posed position suggested that the murderer may have staged it intentionally. There were no signs of a struggle. It was clear that Sharon did not anticipate being shot, as she was facing away from the attacker. An additional concern was the disappearance of her baby, Julie, who had been born just 10 days before the murder. Forensic experts searched the crime scene quickly, knowing that time was of the essence. Every minute that passed increased the urgency to issue media announcements regarding the baby's whereabouts. Unfortunately, they only had a photograph of Julie to share with the public and authorities. When Gary returned to the house, he assisted the police in identifying any missing items. Strangely, they noticed that the holiday poster on the front of the house was gone. Apart from the poster and Julie, nothing of value was taken, even Sharon's wallet was left untouched. This indicated that the murder was not a robbery. The Parker family is known for their kindness and friendliness, with no known enemies or criminal associations. They had no debts or problems, and it did not appear to be a random attack. It seemed to be motivated by personal reasons. The news of Sharon's murder deeply affected the twins, Jacob and Joshua. Until the last moment, they were hopeful that their mother was simply sick and would soon be released from the hospital. During this difficult time, the families of Sharon and Gary came together to support one another and seek justice. To gather more information, the police interviewed the closest neighbors of Sharon and Gary. A neighbor reported seeing a red pickup truck parked near Sharon's garage just before Jacob and Joshua returned home from school. She noticed that the truck was unfamiliar and appeared shabby, though she could not see the license plate. The neighbor then witnessed a woman getting out of the faded red car, carrying a grocery bag. The woman entered Sharon's house calmly, but her face was obscured by a scarf and sunglasses, making the creation of a composite sketch ineffective. This was the only lead the police had, and with no surveillance cameras in the area, it provided little assistance to the investigation. However, they managed to create a basic description of the white, dark-haired woman, which was quickly shared with the media. To gather more details, they used a poster designed for a holiday event. It was essential to talk to those close to Sharon and Gary, as the woman might have been part of a larger criminal scheme. Therefore, detectives were cautious about releasing Gary. He denied any involvement in his wife's murder, and there was no evidence to suggest he had a motive or opportunity, given that he was at work during the incident. Furthermore, Gary cooperated fully with the investigation and did not exhibit any suspicious behavior. Detectives discovered that Gary had a working relationship with a woman named Stephanie. They had taken several business trips together. Gary mentioned that just before the birth of their daughter, Stephanie seemed to become more involved with his family, behaving normally around his wife. Gary recalled that Stephanie visited their home a few days after Sharon was discharged from the hospital. On that day, their eldest daughter, Heather, expressed her dislike for Stephanie's presence, finding it suspicious. The adults dismissed Heather's concerns since she was only 14, but the police found her comment noteworthy. Is it possible that Stephanie kidnapped Julie out of jealousy? Although Gary and Stephanie worked closely together, they insisted there was no romantic involvement. Suspicion arose when a neighbor reported seeing her enter Gary's home, prompting detectives to investigate further. They interviewed Stephanie at the station. She appeared innocent and claimed she was with Gary in the office during the attack. Gary provided a detailed account of his activities on the day of Sharon's death, stating he was working until he received an urgent call from Heather. Witnesses indicated that there were no issues in Gary and Sharon's marriage. Gary described their relationship as harmonious and expressed happiness with their new baby. However, the police questioned why Gary owned a gun for self-defense. This gun was subjected to ballistic testing and did not match the murder weapon. Nevertheless, Gary remained a person of interest in the case. The interrogation lasted about 3 hours and did not raise any alarms. Experts determined that the only injury on Sharon was a gunshot wound to the head, indicating she was killed at close range. No DNA belonging to the killer was found under her fingernails. Meanwhile, a sketch of the suspect, based on a neighbor's description, was widely circulated in the media, resulting in around 100 tips to the police, most of which were deemed unreliable. However, one tip stood out. A woman named Peggy Mason came to the station, confidently claiming to know the identity of the perpetrator based on the police sketch. According to Peggy, she worked as a waitress at a restaurant with a coworker named Craig Kirk, who had a wife named Betty. She recalled that the day before the crime, on March 28, Craig happily told her that Betty was pregnant and could give birth soon. He mentioned this but couldn't provide an exact date for the birth. The day after the tragedy involving Sharon, Craig and Betty had a child together. This could have been a coincidence, but there were many odd details that made Peggy suspicious. A week before the supposed birth, Peggy had seen Betty in the restaurant and noticed that she didn't appear to be pregnant. Her belly seemed fake. By that time, her pregnancy should have exceeded 43 weeks, yet she seemed to be enjoying herself without going to the hospital to induce labor, which seemed strange. When Peggy mentioned these concerns to Craig, he shrugged them off, citing rare cases where pregnancies can behave unusually. However, Peggy felt he was not being truthful. Right after Sharon's murder, Craig and Betty celebrated the birth of their baby, and Peggy, having been invited, attended the party. She was surprised at how quickly Betty and the newborn were discharged from the hospital and returned to normal life. Betty seemed at ease, almost as if she hadn't just given birth. As a mother of 3 herself, Peggy doubted that the child had been born just a day earlier. However, it was hard to confirm her suspicions since Betty kept the baby at a distance from the guests, refusing to show her and attributing her behavior to postpartum depression and medication. Towards the end of the party, Peggy managed to get close enough to the baby to inspect her more closely. She noticed that the baby had short hair, as if it had already been shaved, and the baby did not resemble either of its parents, Betty or Craig. When Peggy shared her suspicions with Betty, the woman became angry and quickly sent all the guests away, particularly upset with Peggy. She questioned where a newborn could come from. After seeing the sketch in the media and hearing about what happened to Sharon, Peggy began to connect the dots and suspected that Betty or Craig might be involved in the case. The detectives became interested in this new lead and decided to investigate Betty. She was previously unknown to the police, having been born in Florida on November 7, 1950. In her first marriage, she had 2 children, but her husband was very abusive. Betty escaped his control, filed for divorce, and gained sole custody of her kids. Unfortunately, she faced many challenges. In 1981, she lost custody of her sons due to her difficult financial situation, and the authorities placed them in foster care. Craig met Betty in 1982, and the year later, they began dating and eventually got married. However, despite their efforts, they remained in poverty and struggled to find happiness. Relatives and friends described their lives as a constant battle for survival. Craig worked long hours in a restaurant, and Betty attempted to find work, but she had dropped out of school due to an early pregnancy, which made it hard for her to secure a good job. They lacked stability and prosperity, but both tried hard to improve their situation. Betty desperately wanted to become a mother. She loved Craig and hoped they could have a child together, but despite trying for many years and even seeking medical help, they were unsuccessful. To fulfill her longing for motherhood, Betty worked in various child-related jobs, such as being a Girl Scout leader and performing as a clown at children's events. During this time, she had a minor legal issue when she forged a check, but she quickly resolved it by paying restitution, which meant there was no official record of the offense. For some time, it seemed that Betty and Craig had accepted that they might never become parents. However, Betty was increasingly anxious about possibly losing Craig to a younger woman who could have children. At the end of the year, she surprised her husband and friends with the exciting news that she was finally pregnant. Betty appeared to be pregnant, as her belly was growing. On the evening of March 29th, she returned home with a girl she named Laura. This seemed unusual because she had been discharged from the hospital right after giving birth. Now their family had grown to 3, and they shared their happy news with loved ones. Detectives went to the restaurant where Craig worked, but he was off that day. They found his home address and went to check if he was there. When Craig opened the door, he was visibly intoxicated and struggled to stay upright. He was confused about why the detectives had come to his home. The house was chaotic and unsanitary. The only clear thing Craig could communicate was that they had recently had a baby. He claimed he was celebrating this event, which was why he was drunk. Betty and baby Laura were also present. Betty confirmed that she had just become a mother and had returned from the medical center a few days prior. She stated that the baby was born in a hospital and that they were discharged immediately due to no complications. However, when questioned, she had difficulty remembering the name and address of the hospital. She eventually said it was a hospital on Michigan Avenue, but the detectives' investigation revealed that there was no maternity ward there. Additionally, she could not present a birth certificate, claiming it was lost in the mess around them. When investigators examined the baby, they noticed that the child did not resemble either Craig or Betty. Despite these inconsistencies, the detectives decided against detaining Craig and Betty, as they wished to handle the situation delicately to avoid escalating tensions. Meanwhile, an unmarked car, driven by a woman possibly connected to the situation, left the house while the police were merely observing the family. Shortly after the police left, Betty began causing trouble by carrying and packing items from the house and loading large boxes into her car. Investigators identified a faded red pickup truck that matched the description provided by a neighbor. Betty then got into the car and drove off, with detectives following her at a distance. They eventually decided to pull her over and inspect the vehicle. Inside, they found numerous boxes but no sign of the child. The detectives returned to Betty's home, where they discovered that the baby was with Craig. They considered this a danger to the child's safety and called in Child Protective Services to have the child taken away. Fortunately, the child was unharmed and was quickly taken to the hospital, where an examination confirmed her well-being. Meanwhile, Craig was brought in for questioning. He was surprised by the situation, expressing disbelief about the events. He claimed to have no knowledge of Sharon's case and believed that Betty couldn't be pregnant by him since their relationship had deteriorated and they hadn't been intimate for years. Craig thought his wife might have had an affair but had accepted the idea of her pregnancy and the baby. However, the investigation revealed a more troubling scenario. Craig possessed a pistol that was taken for analysis because the authorities suspected it might be the weapon used to kill Sharon. Despite this, ballistic tests did not confirm its involvement. Craig provided a crucial lead, mentioning that Betty owned a similar pistol of the same caliber, which was never found, suggesting it had been disposed of by her. After hours of questioning, Craig seemed to genuinely believe that his wife was pregnant with another man's child and showed little interest in knowing more. Medical tests later confirmed that the child was Julie, the kidnapped daughter of Sharon and Gary. During her interrogation, Betty was asked if she recognized Sharon Parker. She replied that she had seen Sharon on television and then confessed to killing Sharon. Betty met Sharon and her twins, Jacob and Joshua, while enjoying a day at the mall. They struck up a conversation, and during their chat, Betty revealed that she had recently experienced a miscarriage, a shared concern that connected her to Sharon. Betty mentioned that she was pregnant again and was seeking support. The police confirmed that Betty had indeed become pregnant in early 1989 but had suffered a miscarriage shortly after, which was likely devastating for her. Her marriage was struggling, and she was desperately trying to keep her husband, motivated by a strong desire for a child. Feeling a bond, they exchanged phone numbers before parting ways. Later, Betty learned that Sharon had given birth to a baby girl. At that time, newspapers published the names of newborns, including the parents' contact information, making it easy for friends and family to send congratulations. This information helped Betty locate the Parkers' residence. She claimed she simply wanted to visit Sharon and congratulate her on the arrival of her new baby. When Betty arrived, Sharon recognized her and expressed joy. She handed Betty some money to buy groceries, which is why a neighbor saw Betty carrying a grocery bag near Sharon's house. However, when Betty entered the home and handed Sharon the groceries, the gun she carried for self-defense accidentally discharged, killing Sharon instantly. Betty stated she was in shock and initially considered fleeing but couldn't abandon the baby out of concern for the child's safety. She decided to take the baby with her, genuinely believing it was an accident and insisting that she should be released from custody. Naturally, Betty was arrested. Her account did not align with the crime scene or the reconstructed events. Soon after, she ceased cooperating with investigators and requested a lawyer. During a search of her home, authorities discovered numerous newspaper clippings featuring the names of newborns, specifically girls, indicating her troubling obsession with female infants. The investigation revealed that Betty had met some of these families, frequently introducing herself to medical professionals. However, her odd behavior raised suspicions, leading some to confront her and ultimately ask her to leave. Notably, prior to Sharon's case, she had not brought a firearm, which proved critical to the tragic outcome. In 1991, Betty's trial commenced. The prosecution charged her with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Betty maintained that the shooting was an accident and declared her innocence. She attempted to portray her actions regarding the child in a positive light within her narrative, but no one believed her. After just 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Betty Kirk guilty and sentenced her to life in prison, though she would be eligible for parole at the age of 103. It is unlikely she will ever be free again. The baby, Julie, was returned to her father, Gary Parker, and grew up in a loving home surrounded by her siblings. Gary committed himself to raising his children well, providing them with education and parental love. Crystal McDowell was born on October 26, 1979, in Baytown, Texas. Her childhood was challenging, as her parents, Pamela Sue Surratt and Anthony Paul Tony Walters, struggled with addiction, leading to an unstable home life. Tragically, she lost both parents to apparent overdoses by the age of 11. After their deaths, she was raised by her grandmother and later by her uncle, Jeff Walters. Despite these hardships, she was known for her vibrant smile, striking blue eyes, and uplifting personality. Crystal pursued a career as a flight attendant, where her adventurous spirit thrived as she traveled across the country. During her journey, she met Stephen Wayne McDowell, who was 7 years older than she. Described as gentle and soft-spoken despite his large stature, Stephen won Crystal's heart. They married in April 2007 after dating for a while. He had a daughter from a previous marriage and worked as a shipping manager, but he struggled to maintain stable employment, which forced Crystal to become the primary breadwinner. While she excelled in her career, Stephen's professional instability created tension in their relationship, especially concerning her frequent travels. As jealousy grew, Stephen began to suspect Crystal of having affairs during her flights, despite the lack of evidence of infidelity. Friends noted that Crystal valued her family and sought stability, given her difficult past. In 2016, after 15 successful years as a flight attendant, she decided to leave and join her family's real estate business. This shift allowed her to spend more time with her children and provided a sense of stability. Her uncle Jeff was proud to welcome her into the third generation of their real estate legacy. Crystal quickly excelled in her new role, being recognized for her charm, professionalism, and dedication. However, she confided in close friends that this career change also served a strategic purpose, as she believed it would help her secure custody of her children if she and Steven divorced. By February 2017, Crystal's marriage had deteriorated significantly, prompting her to file for divorce due to years of emotional distress. On March 20th, she called 911, claiming Steven had threatened her and their children. The authorities responded but treated the case as a precaution rather than a criminal incident. At that time, there were no custody arrangements, allowing Steven to legally be with his children. Although officers attempted to contact him, they were unsuccessful. A few days later, Steven returned the children, and Crystal chose not to press charges, opting instead to focus on reducing tension for the sake of their kids. Crystal's friends commented that she tried her best to keep the divorce amicable, putting the happiness of her children first. Steven's adult daughter was troubled by this incident and questioned her father about his behavior. He expressed anger over alleged affairs that Crystal had during their marriage, accusations that those close to her dismissed as false. Many who knew them recognized that their relationship had been toxic for years, and even Steven's daughter acknowledged that, while she and Crystal had a great relationship, the marriage had always been unstable. Although their divorce was finalized in June 2017 and appeared to be friendly, especially since Crystal helped Steven find and purchase a new home while renovating her own, issues beneath the surface remained unresolved. Crystal often asked her family not to mention their plans or outings to Steven, fearing his unpredictable reactions. Even simple activities, like spending time with a friend, could set him off. Despite being legally divorced, Steven seemed unable or unwilling to accept the situation. His social media activity displayed a concerning trend. Shortly after the divorce, he changed his profile picture to a tombstone, then to an image of Santa Muerte, and later reverted to a photo of himself with Crystal. His post suggested an image of a happy family. Meanwhile, Crystal continued to emotionally support Steven, checking in on him regularly. He claimed to be adjusting to the separation and focusing on his life, but his behavior suggested otherwise. One of Crystal's aunts noticed that Steven frequently posted pictures of himself bringing Crystal coffee in bed, as if their relationship was still going strong. In an effort to maintain a harmonious co-parenting relationship, Crystal planned a trip with Steven and the kids, but their intimacy only blurred the lines further. Then, in August 2017, things shifted. Crystal, now 37, met Paul Hargrave, a local jeweler and fellow single parent. Paul was charming, ambitious, and shared Crystal's passion for travel and adventure. Their relationship developed quickly, and for the first time in a long time, Crystal felt truly happy. Although she wanted to tell her family about Paul, she asked them to keep it a secret until she found the right time to inform Steven, still fearful of his reaction. However, that fear didn't stop her from publicly sharing her happiness. On August 23rd, she posted on social media that she had never felt so joyful and that her heart was filled with a happiness she never thought possible. Just 2 days later, on August 25th, Hurricane Harvey approached. Crystal woke up at Paul's house, preparing to face the storm and fulfill her responsibilities for the day. At 7:01 a.m., she texted Steven to ask if he had collected clean water for the kids and informed him that she was heading to his house to take shelter with them. She intended to visit a property afterward for a showing. Paul's security cameras recorded the last known images of Crystal that morning, first in the kitchen, then walking outside in heels, holding her phone, as she got into her black Mercedes-Benz. She was never seen again. Later that day, Crystal's uncle Jeff became worried. They were close, working together in real estate and communicating frequently. He tried calling her several times to let her know that a scheduled showing had been canceled because of the storm. When she didn't answer, Jeff contacted Steven, who sent a suspicious text, allegedly from Crystal's phone, at 9:30 a.m., stating that she planned to pick up the kids and go to Dallas. Jeff was immediately suspicious. Crystal never changed her plans without informing him, and her phone was essential for her work. Things didn't add up, and fearing something was wrong, he reported her missing to the police before noon on August 26. As floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey swept through Houston, Jeff and two family members confronted Stephen. Stephen claimed Crystal hadn't been to his house in over a week, but his daughter told Jeff that she had hugged her mother the day before. That same day, a sheriff's deputy conducted a welfare check at Stephen's home. Inside, authorities discovered Crystal's black dress in the washing machine, along with her purse and handbag, clear evidence that she had recently been there. For her uncle Jeff, who had helped raise her, it was evident that Stephen was involved in her disappearance. Unfortunately, at the time, Hurricane Harvey had devastated the area, and many law enforcement officers and first responders were focused on rescue efforts in flooded neighborhoods. Consequently, the investigation stalled almost immediately. Desperate for answers, Jeff decided to reach out to the media to raise awareness and search for clues. However, his efforts were overshadowed by the constant news coverage of the storm. After days of no progress, Jeff hired a private investigator, feeling frustrated with the silence of local authorities. This decision sparked backlash. The local police chief and district attorney opposed the involvement of an outside investigator in Crystal's case, arguing that crucial evidence could be compromised. This resulted in increased tensions between Crystal's family, law enforcement, and the local media in Houston. Unwilling to give up, Jeff teamed up with Crystal's new boyfriend, Paul, to offer a $15,000 reward for credible information. They launched a social media campaign that ultimately attracted public attention. However, the investigators began to suspect not only Stephen but also Jeff and Paul. Although Jeff was tirelessly searching for Crystal, law enforcement remained skeptical of him. Rumors about his personal life, including his same-sex relationships, spread throughout the town of Baytown, leading some to believe that these biases influenced how authorities perceived his involvement. The local police commander dismissed Jeff's concerns during a national broadcast, labeling him as overly emotional and a hindrance to the investigation. Paul was also scrutinized. After taking a polygraph test with inconclusive results, his credibility came into question. Things worsened when he sent surveillance footage from his home to news outlets instead of directly giving it to the police. Paul defended his actions by stating that he initially tried to share the videos with the sheriff's office but felt ignored, prompting him to go public to clear his name. Then there was Stephen. Even though he displayed manipulative behavior, threatening self-harm if Crystal left him, investigators perceived him as polite, helpful, and cooperative. However, family and friends described the marriage as deeply unhealthy and controlling. Authorities did not see Stephen as a potential threat or a vengeful ex-husband. This perspective began to shift on Tuesday, August 29th, as floodwaters receded. A family friend discovered Crystal's black Mercedes-Benz parked outside a dilapidated motel, an area highlighted during their online campaign. The doors were unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. Investigators suspect the car was staged as a burglary, but flooding has made it difficult to access. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Crystal's car entering the motel lot at 6:37 a.m. on August 26, the day she disappeared. Just 5 hours later, Stephen was seen on camera at a nearby gas station. He did not purchase gas. Instead, he drove toward the motel, seemingly checking to see if the car was still there. Even more unsettling, other footage captured a hooded figure resembling Stephen riding a bicycle through the rain near the motel that same morning. The evidence was accumulating, and for the first time, attention turned to Stephen, not as a grieving ex-husband but as a potential suspect in a case that had gone too long without resolution. The investigation took a significant turn when surveillance footage from a Walmart, situated just across the highway from the motel where Crystal's car was discovered, showed a man who looked like Stephen buying a bicycle early on the morning of August 26, 2017. He paid with cash, and the timing matched the sighting of a hooded figure on a bike near the scene. Despite this troubling evidence, he denied being involved in Crystal's disappearance. As authorities indicated they lacked direct evidence, they allowed him to go home with his children. Crystal's family was outraged. Her uncle, Jeff, pointed out to the district attorney that Crystal had previously reported that Stephen had threatened to harm their children if she left him. Jeff was convinced of Stephen's emotional and mental instability. It wasn't until September 8, nearly 2 weeks after Crystal vanished, that the district attorney intervened. The children were placed in protective custody, and Stephen was brought in for questioning. However, Stephen controlled the situation. He requested to return home for one last night to organize things and promised to confess the next day. Jeff and other family members were angry, fearing that this unsupervised time might allow Stephen to harm himself and evade justice. On September 9, 2017, Stephen returned to the police station and confessed. He told investigators that during a heated argument, Crystal had told him she would be taking her new boyfriend, Paul, on a family trip instead of him. Due to this, he became enraged. While their children slept upstairs, he attacked Crystal from behind and strangled her to death. Afterward, Stephen wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk of his car, and drove before sunrise to a wooded area near his home, where he disposed of her remains. Even after confessing, he still refused to reveal the location of the body unless the prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty. Due to the damage caused by Hurricane Harvey and the time that had passed, authorities worried that they wouldn't find the body without his assistance, so they accepted his terms. Later that day, Stephen guided authorities to a remote, overgrown area, and Crystal's remains were discovered in an advanced state of decomposition. Stephen McDowell, who was 44 at the time, was charged with first-degree murder, and bail was set at $500,000, which he could not afford. In addition to the issues of jealousy and anger, the case also highlights a more terrifying truth. Without Crystal, Stephen would have no financial resources to support himself and his children. The pursuit of justice moved slowly, as the trial did not commence until June 2019. During this time, Stephen displayed no remorse in court. He tried to create the impression that he was a man suffering from pain, claiming he acted out of a sudden fit of passion, a defense strategy in Texas that could significantly lessen his punishment if accepted. He also suggested that Crystal's death was the result of a consensual encounter that went awry. However, the prosecution effectively countered this narrative, highlighting the ongoing emotional abuse and control he had imposed during their relationship. Stephen's defense team attempted to tarnish Crystal's reputation by presenting unverified text messages and claims that she had been unfaithful. However, her friends and family stood up for her, describing her as a vibrant and loving person dedicated to her children. They also shared experiences of the years of dysfunction and manipulation she endured. One of the most heart-wrenching moments during the trial occurred when Mandy Avalos, Crystal's lifelong friend and guardian of her children, took the stand. She recounted a painful revelation in December 2017, when Stephen and Crystal's 5-year-old daughter shared a secret. The girl recalled the morning her mother went missing. She had heard her parents arguing. After hearing the commotion, she walked from the bathroom into the bedroom, where she witnessed her father pushing her mother onto the bed and covering her mouth and nose with his hand. She stood at the edge of the bed and watched until her mother stopped moving. Afterwards, her father took her upstairs and told her not to speak about what she had seen. Mandy quickly reported the incident to the authorities, and she was placed in a trauma counseling program, but the emotional scars continued to haunt her. Another important witness for the prosecution was Melissa Cherry, Crystal's cousin and close friend. Melissa testified about helping Crystal move out of her home when her conflicts with Stephen escalated. Melissa later supported her move back home after Stephen threatened to harm himself if she did not return. Cherry recounted that even after the divorce, he continued to emotionally manipulate Crystal, including starving himself to make her feel responsible for his health. The day after Crystal went missing, Melissa and Jeff visited Stephen's house, where they found him looking anxious, shaking, and in tears. The daughter of Crystal and Stephen claimed that she had seen her mother the day before and pointed to a black dress in the closet in a concerning manner, saying that evil spirits had taken her away. This disturbing scene prompted Melissa and Jeff to call the police from outside the house, urgently requesting that they remove Stephen from the children's lives, but their requests were ignored. Melissa also shared her account of a family cruise that Stephen had suggested as a way to say goodbye peacefully. Although Crystal hesitantly agreed, she made it clear that there would be no threats, manipulation, or harm involved. However, As the trip approached, an argument over finances led her to cancel, realizing that Stephen was not genuinely trying to say goodbye but was instead attempting to win her back. The most troubling testimony came from an inmate who had shared a cell with Stephen and claimed that Stephen confessed in detail to killing Crystal. According to the inmate, the motive was a text message from another man. He described how Stephen admitted to using zip ties to bind Crystal's hands after her death, information only known to the forensic team. Officials from the Texas Department of Public Safety corroborated parts of Stephen's confession, stating that he claimed Crystal had arrived early on the morning of August 25, 2017. They had an argument, during which she told him that she had never really loved him. She encouraged him to move on with his life. In a fit of rage, he strangled her in the bedroom. The 5-day trial concluded quickly. The jury found Stephen McDowell guilty of first-degree murder in just 3.5 hours. On September 10, 2019, he received a sentence of 50 years in prison, with a requirement to serve at least 25 years before being eligible for parole, potentially allowing for his release in 2042. Crystal's family was heartbroken by what they perceived as a light sentence. Her uncle Jeff exclaimed in court that Stephen deserved a harsher punishment, while others expressed frustration, advocating for a life sentence or the death penalty. However, those options were not available due to the agreement Stephen made in exchange for revealing the location of Crystal's body. The family's main concern was not the length of the prison sentence but rather the emotional impact on the children. Despite being surrounded by love, they faced a devastating loss. Crystal had dedicated her life to them, and now they were left to cope with trauma that many adults would struggle to endure. By 2020, Mandy, who had taken in the children immediately after Crystal's murder, was working to adopt them legally. Some sources indicate that Mandy was Crystal's best friend from childhood, while others suggest they may have had a romantic relationship at one time. Regardless of their history, Mandy was Crystal's most trusted confidant and was committed to caring for the children. Now that you know the complete story, we would love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Stephen McDowell received the justice he deserved? Please share your opinion in the comments. We are reading all of them. Jennifer grew up in Oklahoma, raised by her mother, and had a brother named David. Although from a humble background, Jennifer had a good childhood. She completed high school and went on to study business at National University. Her friends described her as a very sweet woman. One thing that was dear to Jennifer was her faith. Whenever she thought about marriage, the first quality she wanted in a husband was his attachment to religion. Jennifer met 25-year-old Michael Blagg at a party. He was a helicopter pilot in the U.S. Navy and was stationed in San Diego at that time. Michael had grown up in a family that moved frequently because his father was a colonel in the Air Force. He was an incredibly well-behaved child, extremely intelligent, and hardworking. He consistently earning good grades, excelling in co-curricular activities. Michael was so bright that he got into the governor's honor program and attended Georgia Tech to study nuclear engineering. To afford college and complete his higher studies, he enlisted in the Navy. Jennifer was quickly drawn to him because he seemed to value faith as she did. The two began meeting frequently. Michael appeared to be a great family man in Jennifer's eyes, someone who would provide for her and their future children. Jennifer and Michael got married in 1991. While it was Jennifer's first marriage, Michael had been married before. However, that marriage only lasted a year before he parted ways with his first wife. After some time, Michael retired from the Navy and began a career as an engineer. The Blagg family moved to Simpsonville, South Carolina. They welcomed a baby girl named Abby. Jennifer loved living in Simpsonville. The family made new friends through their church, and Jennifer started teaching a women's Bible study group. Michael also became a co-teacher at the Bible school. Jennifer had found a strong, take-charge person in Michael. He was very caring, protective of her. However, according to Jennifer's friends, her behavior suggested otherwise. Sometimes, she becomes anxious and often panics when Michael is about to come home. Jennifer always focused on keeping the house in perfect condition so that Michael could have a comfortable environment when he returned from work. Despite all this, the Blagg family seemed happy. Things took a complete turn when Michael found a new job as operations manager at a manufacturing plant in Grand Junction, Colorado. Jennifer did not want to leave her happy routine in Simpsonville, but she felt compelled to be a dutiful wife to Michael. The family moved to Grand Junction in 2001, and Jennifer started to appear unhappy. It was evident that something was wrong in her personal life. At the time of the move, Jennifer was 34 years old, and Abby was just 6. Just a few months after moving to their new home, an incident occurred that shocked the entire community in Grand Junction. On November 13, 2001, Michael left for work early in the morning. Every day, he would leave early and return in the evening. Due to his protective nature, he would call Jennifer multiple times throughout the day to check if she and their daughter Abby were okay. However, when he called home after arriving at the office, no one picked up the phone. This was unusual since Jennifer always answered his calls. After waiting some time for her to call back, he tried again, but still, no one answered. Concerned for the safety of Jennifer and Abby, Michael left a voicemail. "Hope everything's okay." When there was still no response or news of Jennifer and Abby after several hours, Michael decided to leave the office early and check on his family. As soon as he arrived home, he called 911 and reported that both his wife and daughter were missing. He also informed the operator that there was blood all over the master bedroom of their house. Law enforcement authorities rushed to Michael's home. When police officers entered the bedroom, they found a significant amount of blood. Additionally, the jewelry box was tipped upside down, and Jennifer's purse was dumped on the floor with its contents scattered throughout the room. Initially believed to be a kidnapping case, the officers quickly changed their minds due to the volume of blood present. Kidnappings typically do not leave behind such a large amount of blood at the crime scene. Authorities recognized that there was another aspect to this story. Furthermore, the placement of the blood was peculiar. It was only on the bed, while the walls in the hallway were absolutely clean, with no drag marks in the house. While the investigation team was searching for a murderer, Michael appeared to believe that his wife and daughter had been kidnapped and were still alive. He even requested the public's help in locating his family and posted a reward of $3,000 for anyone who provided information about Jennifer and Abby. The Colorado River became the focal point of the investigation, as the police believed the victims' bodies might have been dumped in the area. While the investigators were searching the areas near the Colorado River, forensic experts were working inside the Blagg home to find any clues that might lead the authorities to Jennifer and Abby. According to people in the neighborhood, the last they had seen of the victims alive was a day earlier, when Jennifer came back home after picking up Abby from school. As forensic experts examined different parts of the house, they found blood in the family van. This was the point when Michael turned from a grieving husband and father to a suspect in a double homicide case. When he was interviewed, he claimed he didn't know anything about where Jennifer and Abby had gone. He said that he hadn't got a clue who would have any malice in their heart against anyone in their family and that Abby was a wonderful girl. Michael provided investigators with a timeline leading up to the incident. He stated that the night before his family went missing, Abby went to bed at her usual time of 7 p.m., while he and Jennifer stayed up late, as was their custom. Around 8 p.m., Jennifer received a phone call from a friend who invited her to lunch the following day. She accepted and planned to meet her friend before going to bed with Michael around 10 p.m. On the day of the incident, November 13, 2001, Michael woke up at approximately 5:30 a.m. to go to work. He noted that both Jennifer and Abby were still asleep since they typically woke up around 6:30 a.m. Michael usually called Jennifer several times during the day to check on her, and he did the same on November 13th. However, she did not answer his calls. At first, he did not think much of it, but after a few hours, he became concerned and returned home, only to find that both his wife and daughter were missing. It was evident to someone that November 13th would be an unusual day for Jennifer and Abby, as Abby's school received a call on November 12th. The caller informed the school administration that Abby would not be attending classes the next day. While the school did not know who made the call, They recorded that Abby was expected to be absent on November 13th. In addition to the previously mentioned voice notes, more were discovered. One of them included the message in which the sender greeted his bride and expressed hope that she was out enjoying herself and doing exciting things. As the investigation expanded, the officers began to strongly suspect that Michael had something to do with the disappearance of Jennifer and Abby. Michael, on the other hand, constantly denied this, even criticized the police for considering him a suspect in the case. He told the press that it bothered him to be looked into, despite the fact that he had lost his wife and daughter. A month after Jennifer and Abby's disappearance, Michael moved out of the family home, stating it was too hard to stay in the house where he lost them. While investigators did their job, Michael kept making frequent appearances in the media, saying he believed this was a case of burglary gone wrong. Michael even bought Christmas presents for Jennifer and Abby, told everyone he hoped they would be home soon to open them. People were sympathetic towards Michael because he wasn't only grieving the loss of his family, he was also a suspect in their possible murder. However, police and some of Jennifer's friends believed Michael had something to do with his wife and daughter's disappearance. As time passed, the suspicion grew stronger due to new evidence and witness testimonies, yet Michael maintained his innocence. Initially, he denied having any fight with Jennifer before she and Abby disappeared, but investigators later found a note in which Michael apologized to Jennifer for letting the devil get a foothold in their lives. However, that wasn't as strange as the discovery of thousands of adult images in the Blagg home. When questioned about them, he claimed Jennifer had downloaded these images because she wanted to be a good wife and serve her husband. One of Jennifer's friends also provided the police with peculiar information. According to her accounts, right before Jennifer and Abby went missing, Jennifer called her and asked if they could visit her, stating that Michael would not be with them. This was unusual for she, who knew the Blagg family always traveled together. In February 2002, Michael was caught stealing a shredder and a table from his office. He was brought in for questioning about the theft. While answering questions from investigators, Michael kept asking about the possible penalties for murder. This behavior was particularly strange coming from someone whose wife and daughter had disappeared a few months prior. Investigators compiled all their information on Michael and tried to crack him under questioning. One day, when the officers rang Michael's bell, no one answered the door. They could hear the sound of running water coming from inside the house, but no one responded to the knocks on the door. Suspecting something was wrong, the police kicked the door open. When they entered the bathroom, they found Michael lying in the bathtub with his wrists cut. There was also a photo of Jennifer and Abby with him, along with a note saying that he didn't kill his wife or daughter. He was quickly taken to the hospital and given medical care. Due to the harsh winters in Colorado, the search operation was halted until spring. After the initial attempts, the search resumed in April. Investigators marked a 45-kilometer radius for the search operation, but they couldn't find any clues regarding the bodies of Jennifer or Abby. In the meantime, one of Michael's co-workers called the police and shared an important tip. On the day of Jennifer and Abby's disappearance, Michael's colleague saw him taking the trash out at work. Michael was pushing a pallet jack with 2 large cardboard boxes, which he discarded on the loading dock that led to the trash compactor. The co-worker, unaware of the contents of the trash, even asked Michael if he needed any help discarding it. A person discarding normal trash would have said yes, but Michael Black immediately declined the offer. It was unusual for someone working as an engineer in the company to have anything to do with trash handling. This was an important lead that could take the authorities to Jennifer and Abby's bodies. The first task was locating the landfill where Michael's firm was dumping their trash. Once the landfill site was tracked, the most challenging aspect remained, locating the possible areas in the landfill where trash from Michael's company might have ended up. When this development was revealed to the public, a normal person would have been happy that the case of his wife and daughter's disappearance was nearing closure. However, Michael did exactly the opposite and left the state. It was particularly strange that Michael never shared his plans or his whereabouts with anyone, including the police. Nearly 7 months after Michael's wife and daughter went missing, the authorities finally discovered what they had been searching for. On June 5, 2002, after weeks of searching, they located Jennifer's body in a landfill, wrapped in a red and black tent. The body was unwrapped, cleaned, and sent for an autopsy. The results of the autopsy shocked everyone, including Jennifer's family and friends. She had been shot in the left eye, with the bullet still lodged in her skull. The report indicated she was killed while sleeping, as investigators found a retainer in her mouth that she only wore at night. After discovering Jennifer's body, investigators suspected that Abby's body was also in the same landfill. They intensified their search efforts to find Abby's remains, but despite 7 weeks of searching, sifted through approximately 7,000 tons of trash, the police could not locate her. Michael Blagg was in custody. The police had a strong reason to arrest Michael, but they faced a challenge: no one knew his whereabouts. After some investigation, they discovered that Michael's mother lived in Georgia, leading them to believe he might be hiding with her. This suspicion turned out to be correct. When the police searched her house, they found Michael there. He was quickly arrested and transported back to Colorado to face charges for the murders of his wife and daughter. This was the first time the public learned that the man pretending to be a grieving husband and father was actually his family's murderer. At this point, Michael's first wife also spoke out in the media, claiming he was a normal person who had never abused her during their marriage. However, as the investigation continued, it became clear that the Blagg family's life was not as perfect as it appeared. From the start, Jennifer and Michael frequently argued. After they married, Jennifer discovered that Michael was not the religious man she believed him to be. He attended parties, which Jennifer disapproved of due to her religious values. Despite her repeated requests for him to change what she considered unacceptable behavior, Jennifer ultimately told Michael he needed to choose between her and his partying lifestyle. Michael promised Jennifer that he had changed his ways, and their relationship seemed to improve. This period also saw the birth of their daughter, Abby. However, Michael's commitment to the Navy meant he was often away, which contributed to Jennifer experiencing postpartum depression after Abby's birth. When Michael left the Navy and took a job teaching Sunday school, Jennifer learned something alarming: he had begun behaving inappropriately with the children. He was sharing his conservative views on sensitive issues like abortion and intimate, which ultimately led to his dismissal. This incident exacerbated the Blagg family's financial troubles, as they were struggling to sell their previous home. When the house finally sold, they incurred a loss of over $8,000. Jennifer frequently spoke to her friends in Simpsonville about her dissatisfaction with life in Grand Junction. Despite her unhappiness, she expressed a willingness to remain in Colorado to support Michael, as he seemed content with his job. Meanwhile, as the police sought to uncover the motive behind Michael's alleged murders, a legal firm employee came forward and revealed that Jennifer had visited their office just days before she went missing. She was visibly upset and wanted to consult an attorney. It was later revealed that Jennifer was a victim of abuse at the hands of Michael and was seeking a divorce. Investigators examining Michael's computer discovered that he regularly used an escort service. Interviews with the escort service employees revealed that Michael often visited for massages from topless women. When questioned, Michael claimed that his wife was aware of this because they were having intimate issues, and he went to the massage center for research. However, it was later revealed that Michael had a strong addiction to adult movies and had coerced Jennifer into watching it with him. This explained why Jennifer wanted to separate from Michael. Her diary indicated she was very religious, continually praying and trying to strengthen her relationship with God. Additionally, investigators found a note in one of Jennifer's books where she described a recent argument with her husband. The evidence and testimonies against Michael clearly indicated that he was abusive and pressured Jennifer into unwanted situations. When she resisted, he decided to kill her to hide his secret life and addictions. This also shed light on the disappearance of Abby. Investigators believed she may have witnessed her father's murder of her mother, leading Michael to kill her as well. Due to insufficient evidence linking Michael to the murders of Jennifer and Abby, the prosecution opted not to pursue the death penalty. Michael was granted bail and allowed to live with his mother while he awaited trial. In March 2004, his trial began, and he faced charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution argued that Michael killed his wife because she wanted a divorce. Afterward, he wrapped the bodies of his wife, Jennifer, and their daughter, Abby, and took them to his workplace, where he discarded them. He then acted as if nothing had happened, calling home multiple times and leaving voicemails to give the impression that he was completely unaware of the situation. On November 13th, he called the police, claiming it was a case of home invasion. Jennifer's mother, Marilyn Conway, testified that Jennifer had abused her daughter multiple times during their marriage, including an incident where he choked her while intoxicated. The defense attorney claimed that an intruder broke into their home, killed Jennifer and Abby when they tried to resist. Throughout the trial, Michael insisted he was innocent and not involved in the murders of his wife and daughter. On April 16, 2004, a jury convicted Michael Blagg of murdering his wife, sentencing him to life in prison without parole. However, 10 years later, the conviction was overturned because one of the jurors had falsely reported their history of domestic violence on the juror questionnaire. This led to Michael being granted a retrial, but the Colorado Supreme Court issued an emergency stay to keep him in prison while he awaited the new trial. Michael Blagg's retrial commenced in February 2018, during which his lawyers presented new evidence in hopes of proving his innocence. They also challenged the investigative methods used in the original case. Despite these efforts, Michael was again found guilty of killing his wife and received the same life sentence as before, concluding this tragic case. Abby's body was never found, so Michael was not convicted of any crime related to Abby due to lack of evidence. In 2012, a 17-year-old girl named Jessica Evans was living with her mother, Chris. Just before summer vacation, she met 22-year-old Jacob Wheeler, who had recently moved across the street to his brother's house. They connected at a party and quickly developed a bond. Jacob was a quiet country boy who had recently returned from a 3-year stint in Iraq. Although he was 5 years older than Jessica, Chris felt reassured and trusted him. On August 26, 2012, Jessica asked Chris for permission to join Jacob on a night fishing trip at the Little Wabash River, a popular location. Initially hesitant, Chris eventually agreed after Jessica persuaded her, but insisted that Jessica be careful and return home by 5 a.m. She assured her mother that she understood and would return to her sister Megan's house at that time to babysit her nephew Miles. Little did she know that this fishing trip would be her last. Just before midnight, Chris called Jessica to check on her. Jessica assured her mother that she was fine and that she and Jacob were nearly done fishing and would be home soon. However, when Chris woke up at 5 the next morning, she realized that Jessica had not returned home. This was unusual, especially since Jessica had plans to babysit her nephew. Concerned, Chris tried calling Jessica's cell phone, but there was no answer. She also sent text messages that went unanswered. Chris felt something was wrong. She was sure Jessica would inform her if plans changed. Chris went to Jacob's house, but his brother Jeremy said that Jacob hadn't come home either. Jeremy wasn't worried because he believed Jacob could handle himself. However, by 9 a.m., Jessica's family was beginning to worry. Chris thought it was possible that Jacob's truck had broken down or that they were stuck somewhere. After 12 hours without any news about Jessica and Jacob, Chris contacted the White County Sheriff's Office for assistance. Sheriff Doug Meyer, who was relaxing at home, received the call but wasn't overly concerned. He speculated that Jessica and Jacob might have run away together and figured they were likely okay, but he needed to find out where they had gone. The sheriff decided to request a warrant to trace Jessica's cell phone, but that could take some time. Meanwhile, the sheriff's deputies followed the family's advice and headed to the spot where Jessica and Jacob were supposed to be fishing. The area was remote, accessible only by gravel roads. The deputies found a 50-foot-long overgrown path that led to a popular fishing location. They saw clear signs that someone had been there, such as abandoned packages, but there were no signs of any trouble or crime. An extinguished campfire was present, but the area was clean, and Jacob's truck was missing. However, the sheriff's intuition about Jessica and Jacob led him to believe that nothing serious had happened. It seemed like they were simply hanging out together. Eventually, the sheriff obtained records from Jessica's cell phone carrier to help track her phone. They discovered that the phone's signal was coming from a tower near the campground area where she and Jacob had been fishing. This indicated that Jessica's phone was still active and nearby, which contradicted the sheriff's assumption that she had simply run away. If Jessica and Jacob were still there, why weren't they answering their phones? Investigators began to worry that they might be stranded, injured, or worse. News of Jessica and Jacob's disappearance quickly spread through Norris City, raising alarms in the community. Some speculated that they had just run away, but Chris was confident that Jessica would not do that. Upon learning that Jessica's cell phone was still in the vicinity of the fishing site, the sheriff's office felt a growing sense of unease about the situation. At dawn the following day, officers from the White County Sheriff's Office, along with neighboring law enforcement and many volunteers, returned to the fishing area to search for any traces of Jacob and Jessica. Their families also joined in the search. However, after 3 hours, they had no leads. Neither Jacob nor Jessica nor their pickup truck was found. The pickup must have been at the scene if something had happened to them. But what if they had discarded their phones and fled? If they had indeed left together, they would eventually create an electronic footprint. The police also checked their bank card usage to see if there had been any transactions but found no activity. While there were no significant findings in the bank statements, one clue emerged from Jessica's phone records. The police were aware of the midnight call from Chris, but Jessica had another phone conversation shortly after, around 12:30 a.m. on Sunday night. Investigators identified the person she spoke with as a young man named Ron Wooderson. His name was familiar to the police due to his past legal issues, raising their suspicions about his involvement. Consequently, they decided to interview Ron to understand the details of their conversation. Sheriff's deputies met with Ron and asked him about his last interaction with Jessica. He eventually acknowledged that he called her late at night, stating he was at a party with friends. Ron claimed he wanted Jessica to join him at the party, but when she mentioned she was busy fishing, Jacob, her boyfriend, grabbed the phone. Ron explained that Jacob had explicitly prohibited him from calling Jessica, which led to a heated argument, primarily fueled by Jacob's anger over Ron contacting his girlfriend. The deputies recorded the names of other party attendees and verified Ron's alibi. They found that everyone else confirmed he did not leave the party after the call. By the end of the day, search volunteers were ready to go home without any leads. However, one of Jacob's friends, while riding an ATV, discovered a pickup truck hidden in the woods behind an old farmhouse, about 2 miles from where Jacob and Jessica had been fishing. It turned out to be Jacob's truck. The situation quickly became distressing when they found a woman's body in the back of the truck, shot twice in the head. Her condition raised further alarm. She was partially clothed, with some of her clothes strewn on the ground nearby. Investigators suspected that more than just a murder had occurred. The victim had no identification, but in such a tight-knit community, that was not a significant issue. Some of the investigators recognized Jessica from her entire life, and it became clear that they had just discovered her body. The discovery of Jessica's body marked a turning point. This suggested that she may have met with a man before her death and may have fought back. Authorities hoped that the coroner could obtain DNA evidence from the crime scene. The police searched the area around the pickup and found shell casings that matched the 2 wounds on Jessica's head. The casings were located on the right side of the truck, next to a large bloodstain, indicating that Jessica had been shot at that location. As investigators examined Jacob's pickup truck, which was filled with fishing gear and personal belongings, they noted that Jacob was missing. A crucial clue emerged when they discovered blood in the driver's side cab of the truck. Blood samples were sent for DNA testing to determine whose blood it was and to locate Jacob. Law enforcement began to consider Jacob as a potential suspect, questioning whether he was a victim himself or if he was responsible for Jessica's death. Community suspicions arose, with some believing that Jacob, a veteran, had the skills to commit murder. Speculation swirled that a late-night phone call from Ron might have triggered a violent reaction from Jacob. Investigators grew increasingly concerned about Jacob's mental state, particularly if he felt he was losing Jessica. The day after Jessica's body was found, the police obtained a search warrant for Jacob's brother's house, suspecting that Jacob might be hiding there. Although they didn't find him, they discovered that one of his guns was missing. Jeremy, Jacob's brother, said there was no reason to worry. Jacob had simply taken the gun for a fishing trip, which he considered normal. However, investigators became concerned when they learned that the missing gun was a .22, matching the shell casings found at the crime scene. Despite this, Jacob's family insisted he was innocent, believing that he would have put his life on the line to protect Jessica if she had been in danger. As the week went by, the search for Jacob intensified. Police from multiple counties joined forces, deploying search teams, K-9 units, and aerial surveillance to locate him. The White County Crime Suppression Unit even offered a $2,000 reward for information leading to Jacob's capture. This reward prompted several calls to the sheriff's office with tips, but one was particularly noteworthy. An employee at a gas station located 12 miles from where Jessica's body was found reported seeing Jacob buy a pack of cigarettes on Sunday night, about a day after he and Jessica disappeared. The employee noted that Jacob was wearing a camouflage hooded sweatshirt and recalled seeing an ID card in his wallet that appeared to belong to Jacob Wheeler. This made Jacob the primary suspect in Jessica's case. As time passed, it seemed increasingly likely that Jacob was on the run. Investigators visited the gas station to review surveillance footage, where they spotted a man in a hooded sweatshirt who partially obscured his face and avoided looking directly at the camera. Although it was a warm night and would have been uncomfortable in such attire, it was difficult to confirm with certainty that he was Jacob. The man quickly purchased cigarettes and left the store. While the footage from one camera did not reveal his face, a second camera outside captured him getting into a car driven by a woman, a person one of the sheriff's deputies recognized. Police quickly went to the woman's home, where they saw the car from the gas station video parked nearby. When questioned by investigators, the woman admitted to driving the man to the gas station but insisted he wasn't Jacob, claiming he was her boyfriend instead. This left the identity of the man in the video as a dead end, and all police attention turned back to Jacob. Detectives believed he was alive and suspected his brother Jeremy of hiding him. They searched his house at night to catch him off guard, but even after a second search, there was still no sign that he had been there. After Jacob disappeared, his brother and father were certain he had nothing to do with Jessica's death. His father, Harold, was determined to prove his son's innocence. He believed he was searching for Jacob's body, not the body of his son. 6 days later, Sheriff Doug Meyer received a call from Harold, who mentioned that he had discovered something that others had overlooked. He believed he saw car parts in a wooded area just a quarter mile from where Jacob and Jessica were camping. Investigators decided to follow up on this lead and found some car parts, specifically pieces that belonged to the fender of a pickup truck. The area where the parts were located showed damage to the trees, indicating that a pickup truck had driven into the woods and through the trees, causing damage. However, it was clear that these were not Jacob's truck. While the connection to the crime was unclear, the discovery piqued investigators' interest as they had no other leads. One of the car parts had a serial number, which the police were able to look up online to determine the specific model of the pickup truck. In a small town, it's relatively easy to track down such a vehicle. One of the sheriff's deputies was familiar with a man named Danny Costin, a 36-year-old electrician from White County, who drove a similar truck. But could he be involved in a violent crime? Danny had never caused trouble, had no criminal record, and was a well-known member of the community. Investigators decided to visit his workplace to speak with him. They found his pickup truck in the parking lot, which had considerable damage consistent with the parts discovered in the woods. As the investigator examined the pickup truck, Sheriff Doug Meyer questioned Danny about the damage. Danny explained that he had gone fishing on the Little Wabash River but had difficulty launching his boat because he was very drunk. He couldn't remember much from that night, but he did recall that it had been around 1 a.m. on the same night that Jacob and Jessica went fishing. He insisted that he didn't see anyone else in the area during his time there. Meanwhile, investigators made a significant discovery. They found a considerable amount of blood in the back of Danny's pickup truck. He was visibly shocked when they informed him about it. The sheriff advised Danny that if he had anything to share, he should do so now. Danny then revealed that he had been in the woods that night and had witnessed Jacob attack Jessica twice. However, this account did not clarify why there was blood in his truck. Forensic analysis confirmed it was human blood. Investigators took Danny to the police station for further questioning. He reiterated that he was drunk, went to the Little Wabash River, and encountered Jacob and Jessica. He mentioned that Jacob had gone into the woods, leaving him alone with Jessica. Danny claimed that Jessica had come on to him of her own accord. He said they went to his truck and parked 2 miles away behind an abandoned farmhouse. According to him, they had consensual intimate contact until Jacob found them in the dark. An argument broke out between Jacob and Jessica, during which Jacob attacked her. Danny stated that he felt scared when Jacob approached him, leading to a struggle during which the gun went off, injuring Jacob. He claimed this shot was accidental. In a panic, he placed Jacob in the back of his pickup truck, worried that no one would believe his story of self-defense, so he concealed the body where it wouldn't be found. Danny provided detailed information about where he had left Jacob's body. The police were skeptical of Danny's story, as it did not align with Jessica's character. His account of how Jessica willingly came with him, only for Jacob to show up unexpectedly, seemed implausible. Ultimately, it was determined that he had attacked Jacob, thus confirming the suspicions held by Jacob's family. Consequently, Danny Costin was arrested. Investigators followed Danny's directions to find Jacob's body, venturing deeper into the woods along a dirt road. After 6 days of searching, they discovered Jacob's body with a bullet wound in his head. Forensic evidence contradicted Danny's claims. Blood found in Jacob's pickup truck, which belonged to Jacob, did not align with Danny's narrative. He had previously stated that he placed Jacob's body in his own truck, raising questions about the source of the blood. During a reinterrogation, inconsistencies in Danny's account led him to admit the truth. He explained that he attempted to drive his truck to launch a boat, but, being very drunk and faced with dense woods, he sought help from Jacob and Jessica. Although Jacob advised against it because of Danny's intoxication, they eventually agreed to help him. After climbing into the back of Jacob's truck, Danny, armed with a pistol, unexpectedly shot Jacob in the head through the driver's side window, in full view of Jessica, who was terrified and screamed. Danny then pulls Jacob out of the truck, saying he has no idea why he shot Jacob or what his next actions will be. Jessica begs Danny to spare her life, which prompts the sheriff to ask if she will agree to intimacy in exchange for her safety. Danny interpreted her desperate plea for self-preservation as an offer, and he proceeded to assault her in the back of Jacob's truck. Despite her begging, he shot her, asserting afterward that he did not know why he committed these acts. Afterward, he transported Jessica's body in Jacob's truck, driving to Wayne County to hide Jacob's body while discarding both his gun and Jacob's gun out of the window during the trip. The police have never recovered either firearm. On September 4, 2012, Danny appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He later changed his testimony, claiming he had not been informed of his rights before questioning, but an appeals court dismissed his appeal. Video evidence from the interrogation showed that he was indeed read his rights. Additionally, police had strong evidence linking Danny to the crime. His truck contained Jacob's blood, and DNA from Jessica was found on his body. In January 2014, Candace Brown, Danny's girlfriend, was found guilty of lying to the authorities during the initial investigation. She had provided him with a false alibi. She was sentenced to 60 days in jail, 30 months of probation, 100 hours of community service, and was required to pay various court fees and fines. On August 20, 2013, Danny Costin was convicted and sentenced to 53 years in prison. Judge Tom Foster stated he was constrained by the plea agreement between the state and defense but believed Danny deserved a harsher sentence. Danny had agreed to waive a jury trial in return for lesser charges and a potentially reduced sentence if found guilty. Judge Foster noted that the court accepted this deal only with the consent of Jessica's and Jacob's families. Gregory Bohr was born on July 19, 1981, in the American village of Scotts, Kalamazoo County, Michigan. He was the firstborn of Sharon and Gys. They later had two more children, Chad and Troy. Gregory has a close relationship with his brother Chad, whom he takes good care of. Solidarity and strong friendship are what set this family apart. In high school, Gregory became interested in motors and technology, devoting all his free time to experiments, studying mechanical devices and machines. During this period, he met a girl whom he began to court. Their passionate romantic relationship ended in engagement. The marriage was registered, and on March 24, 1999. While still very young, they found out they were expecting a child, and then a daughter named Lily was born. The birth of Lily filled Gregory with new strength and inspiration. After receiving his high school diploma, Gregory searched for work and, fortunately, quickly found a position at a prestigious company specializing in the production of motorcycles. This aligned with his interests, but the experience he gained pushed him forward. Soon, he changed jobs to work in a company that produced auto parts, where he had the opportunity to develop his skills, demonstrate himself as a talented worker. However, not everything went smoothly in family life. Just like at work, only love remained. Amid the routine, the spouses forgot about the bright feelings that once connected their hearts. As a result, the tension in their relationship led to divorce. Little Lily stayed with her father, and Gregory took on this responsibility without hesitation since his daughter was the meaning of his existence. Gregory remained a bachelor until 2012 when he met Janelle. She was also from a farming background. At that time, she worked at the state post office and had previously been married. Both spouses faced difficulties in family life. Initially, these problems seemed insignificant, but over time, they worsened. Ultimately, Janelle accused her husband of violence and abuse, pointing out injuries in the eye area. The statement was accepted, and an investigation began, which led to an unexpected result. It turned out that she had harmed herself solely to accuse her husband of something he had not done. Upon meeting, Janelle and Gregory discovered that, in addition to mutual attraction, they shared common interests, the most significant of which was a love for firearms. Very soon, their trips to the shooting range became one of their favorite activities. They were happy, enjoying each other's company, and the age difference did not bother them at all. Gregory introduced his loved ones to Janelle and made plans for their future together. Nevertheless, as the relationship progressed, his relatives noticed some unpleasant changes. Gregory began to distance himself from his family, while Janelle made no effort to strengthen his ties with his loved ones. In 2012, without warning anyone and maintaining strict confidentiality, they got married in Las Vegas. Following that, they moved with Lily to a house on South 36th Street, Pavilion Township, near Scotts. The spacious basement allowed them to convert it into a room for storing collectible weapons and ammunition. Thanks to the large plot of land next to the house, they could train without going to the shooting range. That same year, their son Jason was born. For Gregory, family was the main priority, and he tried to spend as much time as possible with his children. He was especially proud of Lily as he watched her grow into a responsible and self-confident young girl. After a long time in the auto parts industry, Gregory felt the need for a change and moved to the pharmaceutical industry. However, his work schedule became completely different, with the added burden of night shifts. Meanwhile, Janelle still did not seek to communicate with her husband's family. Soon, she began to limit encounters for little Jason with his grandmothers and uncles. Additionally, her indifference to people dear to Gregory was evident. One could say that her entire life revolved around her husband. Obsessed with the idea of becoming the center of the universe for him, Janelle began to feel envy towards the love Gregory showed his eldest daughter. She stopped taking care of Lily and did everything to make the girl's life unbearable. Despite Gregory's attempts to maintain harmony in the family, the relationship between Janelle and Lily worsened with each passing day. On an April afternoon in 2014, Gregory's patience reached its limit, and he filed for divorce in court. He requested joint custody of Jason, but as expected, it was not easy to fight with Janelle. She appealed the divorce request, arguing that the marriage could still be saved until the legal aspects were resolved. Gregory moved into the basement of the house, surrounded by a variety of weapons collected over the years of marriage, and slept on a mattress. To his disappointment, the divorce turned into a complicated and lengthy process. On the evening of February 13, 2017, Gregory went to work, telling Lily that he loved her before leaving. The next morning, when his shift ended, he returned home, went down to the basement, and lay down to rest. Around noon, Janelle also came home and, taking advantage of her husband's deep sleep, attacked him with a .40 caliber pistol. Gregory died on the spot. No sooner had she pulled the trigger than she began a series of actions that, in her opinion, should have helped her avoid responsibility. In particular, she attacked herself in the arm and then called 911 to report what had happened in their home. The Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office responded immediately. When a group of officers arrived on the scene, Janelle was already standing outside, clutching her bloody arm. Officer Warren Meisner was among the first to arrive. Along with other police officers, he entered the house and took several photographs. After that, both Janelle and Warren were taken by ambulance to a nearby hospital. During the trip, she told Warren what had happened. According to her, when she came home on her lunch break, she decided to talk to Gregory again about the upcoming divorce. Janelle begged Gregory to reconsider his decision. She then claimed that her lawyer was already aware of Gregory's physical and emotional abuse toward her and Jason. Losing his temper, her husband grabbed his gun and fired several times. When Janelle finished her story, Sergeant Warren looked at her thoughtfully, noticing that she had been speaking with striking calmness. The next day, while in the hospital, Janelle testified again, providing more details. This time, she was listened to not only by the warden but also by another officer. Janelle clarified that upon returning home, she immediately began to wash clothes and then went down to the basement to wake up Gregory. In this new version of her story, she added that during their argument, at one point, he turned toward the rack, took a .45 caliber weapon from the shelf, and fired 2 or 3 attacks into the room without a specific target. Janelle decided that he had finally let loose all his rage and felt relief. However, Gregory pulled out a second weapon, looked into her eyes, and at that same moment, Janelle felt a strong blow to the chest. She fell, hit her head, and lost consciousness. When she came to, she saw Gregory lying lifeless, covered with a blanket, with a weapon in his right hand. Janelle also told the agents about the difficult divorce process and reinforced her story with lies, claiming that Gregory had threatened her and hinted that he would take his own life. Initially, this version of events seemed quite logical for the damage, but one of her gestures made him doubt her credibility. Later, Warren told his colleague that he felt she was trying with all her might to convince him of the truth of her story. Thinking more calmly about what had happened, Warren noticed that, as an experienced shooter and owner of such a number of weapons, Gregory could not have missed, especially since his wife was just a few meters away from him. The relatives of Gregory also pondered this oddity. Gregory's daughter Lily was sure that her father could not harm another person and would not abandon her and her younger brother. Meanwhile, a medical examination of Janelle revealed no injury, despite her claims of a blow and subsequent loss of consciousness. Instead, traces of gunpowder were found on her hands, which added to this murky story. Forensic pathologist Brandy Shattuck performed an autopsy on Gregory's body and concluded that the cause of death was a bullet wound to the head, and the injury was certainly inflicted by another person. Having received these results, the investigators decided to return to the crime scene. The task of reconstructing the sequence of events was assigned to Sergeant James Dunlop and a team of technicians from the forensic lab. Armed with their tools, including laser rangefinders and special spray for measuring the trajectory of projectiles, they entered the basement. Considering all the details collected up to this point, James was especially intrigued by the fact that Gregory was right-handed and the bullet entry wound was on the left side of his face. This indicated that the gun had been fired from a distance of approximately 45 centimeters. Therefore, for James, the hypothesis that Gregory had aimed at himself was rejected. If he had used his left hand, he would not have been able to hold the gun in the normal way to achieve the required angle and distance. Then another inconsistency in Janelle's story emerged. She claimed that her husband was on the bed, but the gun was found at a considerable distance from his body. The next step in the investigation was to measure the angles of the bullet trajectories. Only 2 of the 4 bullets found could be accurately traced based on this data. The experts concluded that Gregory's fatal wound was caused by a .40 caliber weapon, with the bullet remaining in his head. The second bullet pierced part of the door and hit one of the walls, raising a cloud of dust that spread in small particles throughout the room. While examining Gregory's body, investigators found these particles on his eyelashes, neck, and hair. In addition, they were above the blood at the scene, indicating that this shot was fired after Gregory's death. Lastly, James could determine that both Janelle and her husband had roughly the same amount of gunpowder residue on their hands. It was easy to conclude that one of them had the opportunity to wash their hands and attempted to eliminate the evidence. Of course, it was not the victim. Janelle became the prime suspect, and Officer Warren faced many questions and contradictions in this difficult situation. Studying Janelle's past, he found her ex-husband, whom he called to the station to learn about their life together and the alleged assaults. The ex-husband provided a detailed description of the incidents related to the domestic violence complaint from Janelle. Looking into the alleged violence by Gregory towards his wife and son, investigators found no evidence to support Janelle's statement. At that moment, they felt that the pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to come together to form a whole. The case against the suspect was now only a matter of time before she was called in for further questioning. However, she stated that her lawyer had advised her not to say anything without his presence. After completing the investigation on March 1, 2017, the Sheriff's Department presented the prosecutor's office and filed a motion to charge Janelle with murder and unlawful use of a firearm. After the appropriate review and approval, on the same day, Janelle was arrested and taken to the Kalamazoo County Jail. On March 2, 2017, the trial was broadcast live from the jail and presided over by District Judge Vincent C. Westra. The attorney presented her arguments for Janelle's release on bail, arguing for the need to allow her to see her young son. However, Judge Westra denied the request. On June 9, 2017, Janelle received a summons to appear in court issued. Westra judge decided to initiate criminal proceedings, which greatly pleased Gregory's family. The relatives of Janelle felt that they were one step closer to a fair outcome, but they understood that they would have to be patient because the trial had just begun. Unexpectedly for everyone, Janelle agreed to confess to her guilt, which excluded the option of life imprisonment. However, Gregory's relatives were, of course, dissatisfied. On January 11, 2018, 44-year-old Janelle Bohr took the blame for the murder of her 35-year-old husband, Gregory Bohr. Later, on February 12, 2018, a sentencing hearing. In court, Chad spoke about how Janelle deprived her dearest beloved son of his brother. He wished for Janelle to receive the deserved punishment and took the opportunity to talk about the wonderful spiritual qualities of his brother, who was a caring father. Chad said his brother won't be able to see his children graduate from high school, teach his son to ride a bike or walk his daughter down the aisle on her wedding day. Janelle Bohr's defense attorney, Sarisa Montague, said she did not believe her client was a bad person. She said Janelle struggled a lot with why the murder happened, her role in it, and the consequences. Montague said if Janelle had truly considered the consequences of her actions, she would not have committed the crime. Now, the family has lost a son and a brother and a boy without a mother and father, she said. Janelle herself also addressed Judge and asked for forgiveness for what she had done, noting that she deserved serious punishment. The court sentenced her to a term of 17 to 19 years. Jason was subsequently adopted by his uncle Chad and his wife. When Janelle gets out of prison, her son will be 22 years old. Lily will never forget the last words of her dad, who said that he loved her. He will always live in the girl's memory and, watching over her from heaven, will become an eternal guardian angel for his children. Some people have great powers that help them solve complex problems regardless of age. For example, the main character in today's story, Tia Hernlin, was born in 2000. Her parents, Julie Hernlin and Aeneas Hernlin, were a couple of surfers with an adventurous spirit they loved for an active lifestyle. They were very close-knit young people who sincerely loved each other. Tia became the embodiment of their romantic feelings, further strengthened their family bond. They dedicated their favorite activities to their daughter, engaged her in sports, and maintained an active lifestyle, which contributed to both their family ties and Tia's spirit. Julie and Aeneas protected their child in every way possible. Tia was creative and active, following her parents' example. She enjoyed sports, loved interacting with children her own age. Tia also easily connected with the older generation, leaving everyone amazed at how mature she was for her age. She also adored animals, so the family welcomed a dog and 3 cats into their home. In 2005, 5-year-old Tia was still attending kindergarten but was preparing to start school the following year, an important and eagerly anticipated milestone for her. Meanwhile, her parents continued to work and build their careers. At 29 years old, Aeneas had begun a new chapter in his career as a manager at the organization where he had worked for many years. His wife, Julie, was planning to finish her studies soon. A few years prior, she had enrolled in law school at a community college in Daytona Beach, Florida, where they all lived. With just 2 months left before receiving her diploma, Julie was close to fulfilling her dream of practicing law. She intended to become a paralegal to gain the necessary experience and improve further in her field. It all seemed like the idyllic American dream, at least until March 28, 2005. On that early Monday morning, law enforcement officials received an alarming call. A child had contacted 911. At first, the coordinator thought it could be a joke or mistake, but continued to listen to her story. Tia mentioned finding blood in her parents' room and that her parents did not respond when she called for them. She saw her parents lying on the floor in blood and was afraid they were ill, perhaps even dead, so she asked for help. Despite her fear, Tia spoke calmly about the situation. The coordinator realized this was serious, so the police were dispatched immediately. While waiting for their arrival, the dispatcher engaged Tia in conversation, attempting to distract her from panic. The coordinator sought valuable information. Tia mentioned a possible robber, creating the risk that a stranger might still be in the house. However, Tia assured the operator that there were no guests expected that evening, explaining that she had been woken by strange noises, at least 2 bangs that sounded like gunshots. When she went to her parents' room, no one was there, and that was when she found their bodies. Tia immediately thought to call emergency services when she saw the suspicious red splashes. Fortunately, her parents had taught her how to dial 911, a quick action that could potentially save their lives. For a 5-year-old girl, she maintained an impressive level of calm. She informed the coordinator that, apart from her, there was a dog and 3 cats in the house. About 3 minutes after this exchange, the responding officers arrived outside the door. The coordinator informed Tia of this, and she opened the door for them. The police were astonished that the entire conversation had been held with a 5-year-old child who could provide such detailed and coherent information. Tia's calm demeanor ultimately contributed not only to her safety but also to the unfolding investigation. As it turned out, she had interpreted everything correctly. In the early morning hours, a stranger had entered their home. Tia pointed out where her parents' bedroom was. There, the police found the bodies of 2 victims. No weapons were found in the parents' bedroom, and it did not appear to be a case of voluntary end of life. 31-year-old Julie was killed on the spot, and it was already impossible to help her. Her husband, 29-year-old Aeneas, was still breathing, but his condition was critical. Paramedics arrived at the scene and took him to hospital after he was attacked in the head by a gun. Despite the doctor's desperate efforts to save him, he died the next day in a Daytona Beach hospital. Tia was left an orphan. The county sheriff held a press conference to inform the public about the attack and the brave little girl who had survived a real hell. The local community was worried about Tia, but for a 5-year-old, she appeared to be doing fairly well. Child psychologists worked with her, while detectives were in no hurry to talk to Tia about what had happened, as they were still analyzing the information they had collected and didn't want to further traumatize her. They were most concerned about the long-term consequences of the horror she had experienced. After all, at just 5 years old, Tia still didn't fully understand what had happened. In any case, her handling of the situation was impressive and garnered a significant response from the local community. The reaction to the press conference was quite controversial. On one hand, the 5-year-old girl was able to pull herself together, call the police, and meet the patrolman in the house while caring for her injured parents. On the other hand, people were outraged at how this situation could have happened. It was remarkable that Tia managed to provide all the necessary information during the call and remain composed. She communicated with the coordinator and practically did not panic. The actions of the coordinator were also highly praised. In an attempt to understand what happened in the house, detectives launched an investigation to quickly find the criminal and ensure safety on the streets. Additionally, it was believed that Tia could be in danger while the criminal was at large. The motive behind the attack was unclear. It was possible that he could return for her. The bedroom where Tia's parents died was carefully examined, and a cartridge case was found there. They were apparently sleeping and were shot at close range. They had not even had the time to react. Signs of a break-in were found in the house, leading the authorities to initially consider the case as a robbery gone wrong. However, this assumption was quickly refuted, as nothing was missing from the Hernland family home, and the victims died in the same positions in which they had been sleeping. This meant that they had not had time to catch the criminal off guard, which forced him to kill them. It seemed that the assailant's only target was, in fact, Julie and Aeneas. Immediately after shooting both of them, he simply left the house. It was evident that this attack was very personal, so detectives began assessing the immediate circle of the victims to see who might have hated them enough to want them dead. The Hernlands seemed like nice, friendly people who avoided conflict. They were athletes, had no banned substance addictions, and did not abuse alcohol, drinking only occasionally on holidays. Aeneas and Julie had never been known to have any criminal connections, aside from a few traffic fines, and they had no problems with the law. This only made the search more challenging. Detectives went from neighbor to neighbor, interviewing local residents in the hope that someone could provide valuable clues. Those close to the victim spoke of a suspicious neighbor who lived nearby. Both had repeatedly complained about issues with this man. It was David Edward Johnson, a 33-year-old man who, according to several witnesses, had a very erratic temperament. At an early stage of the investigation, no one could provide any specific information about his behavior, so the police decided to talk to him personally. However, when they knocked on his door, he did not answer. There was no evidence against him at that time, and at least a search or arrest warrant would have been needed, which they did not yet have. Consequently, the police were forced to leave empty-handed but decided to investigate this man further while he was still potentially on the run. As it turned out, David had repeatedly had run-ins with the law. However, until that point, there had been no violent incidents. His convictions were minor and related to banned substance use and possession, although more disturbing details emerged. Investigators found that shortly before the tragedy, the Hernlands had tried to obtain a restraining order against their neighbor. This occurred back in January, 3 months before the double murder, when Julie went to court due to David's alarming behavior. In particular, on the day before the hearing, David drove past their house and shouted several threats at them. While the police were trying to determine any connection between these events, David Johnson was found in his home with no signs of life. When the police arrived in the area, they discovered him dead from a single gunshot wound to the head, with a gun lying next to him. The approximate time of death was determined to be the same day. He had taken his own life within a few hours of Aeneas and Julie's murder. This is why he did not open the door to the detective when he first visited the house. Ballistics tests were conducted, confirming that Aeneas, Julie, and David were attacked with the same gun, the same pistol that was found in David's house. Evidence indicated that the main suspect, having disputes with his neighbors, had taken his own life. After finding David's body, forensic experts conducted a thorough examination. Detectives hoped to find clues that would help them understand what led to this tragic outcome and the simultaneous deaths of 3 individuals. The most disturbing evidence that the police managed to find was a collection of newspaper clippings related to an arrest in November. They were pinned to the refrigerator door, and, in addition, documents related to the trial were lying in plain sight. It was discovered that all of this was connected to the same episode. It is likely that David blamed his neighbors, the Hernland family, for his troubles. Hatred and paranoia were evident in David's behavior. Everyone who knew him well was aware that he regularly used banned substances. A toxicological examination was conducted, which confirmed that at the time of the crime, he was in a state of severe intoxication from illegal substances, apparently using them to suppress feelings of fear or, conversely, falling into paranoid delirium due to their use, which ultimately led him to take up arms. Unfortunately, it was not possible to reliably ascertain the motive for the attack since there was no suicide note in the house. Consequently, the detectives delved deeper into matters related to the restraining order. Now, they needed to understand what could have made David harbor such intense hatred for his neighbors, who appeared to be a nice, harmless couple. It was found that David Johnson had encountered further legal troubles. The police raided his house and discovered several bushes of illegal plants. He had converted his basement into a makeshift garden for growing marijuana. Following this incident, he began experiencing more problems with the law. The police sought to determine whether these issues could be connected to the double murder, so they interviewed David's closest associates. Several friends, including individuals connected to the criminal world, provided a crucial insight. David blamed his neighbors for reporting him to law enforcement. There was no reason to accept this claim, as Julie and her husband had never visited his house to see the illegal plants. However, David was convinced that the Hernlands had instigated his troubles. Detectives investigated this statement, leading to a search at his address. However, the findings did not corroborate David's assumptions. The Hernlands were truly uninvolved, the caller was someone else entirely, and the plants that had been discovered in David's home were found purely by accident. No one was actively seeking to find them. In November 2004, a report was received by the police regarding a burglary at a neighboring house. David was investigated since he had previously had legal issues. They merely wanted to check his involvement. During a search of his residence, illegal plants and steroids were discovered accidentally. It seemed David was not making much effort to hide them, and one of the officers simply caught a distinct smell. David's hatred and suspicion towards Aeneas and Julie were entirely unfounded. However, this erroneous belief became the catalyst for a future tragedy. Due to his delusions, David developed a deep-seated animosity towards they, rendering him fixated on seeking revenge. That is why he began threatening Aeneas and Julie. David did not articulate a coherent reason for his animosity. Instead, he began to harass the neighbors. He repeatedly approached Aeneas and Julie on the street, accusing them of stalking him, a claim that bewildered they, as they were not persecuting him. Although they had genuine concerns regarding his potential ties to crime and banned substance use, they chose not to involve the police, believing it was none of their business. Julie often spoke to her friends and family about David's odd behavior. As the tragedy approached, these conversations became increasingly frequent. Julie felt immense pressure and fear. By December 2004, she began documenting all the incidents in her diary, noting the date, time, and detailed descriptions of her neighbors' behavior. By January of the following year, these threats had escalated to a continuous pattern, causing serious concern for the Hernland family. David began to appear near the Hernland family's home with increasing frequency, despite the fact that it was situated in a dead-end street, and he had no legitimate reason to be there. His actions grew more intrusive and frightened the Hernland family, leading to dozens of entries detailing his disturbing behavior. Julie regarded these as strong evidence that would convince a judge of David's dangerousness and justify her request for a restraining order. They had exhausted their patience and were genuinely frightened, prompting Julie to turn to the courts. Unfortunately for them, the judge presiding over the case rejected the motion, concluding that no violence had occurred on David's part. He had not physically attacked them but limited himself to verbal threats. It was impossible to prove the fact of persecution based on the accusations and evidence provided. Julie returned home empty-handed, without a restraining order. Only the sheriff did not stand aside. He spoke to David, warning that if he did not back down, Hernland's repeated statements could lead to something more serious. The refusal to issue a restraining order caused real despair for Julie. She was considering changing her place of residence, but that would take time. She turned to her friend Michelle on the very day she learned of the verdict. Julie was so frightened by her neighbor's behavior that she told Michelle that if something happened to her, only David could be to blame. Her friend tried to calm her down in every possible way, but her words proved to be prophetic. She had only a week left to live, as did her husband. David was notified of the neighbors' attempts to obtain a restraining order, which only confirmed his delusion that they held a grudge against him and wanted to put him behind bars. Probably from that moment on, a murder plan began to form in his mind, which he later executed. During a press conference, the sheriff confirmed that the neighbors' conflict had indeed taken place. Tensions were rising, however, no one expected David to take up arms. There were no obvious prerequisites or serious quarrels, so everything died down until that fateful night. The authorities concluded that an unfortunate combination of circumstances, abuse of a prohibited drug, and emotional stress had driven David to madness. Once again, having used the prohibited drug, he decided to eliminate the people he considered a threat to his freedom. Fortunately, he did not intend to kill the child, but perhaps he simply forgot about her presence in the house. He left quickly and did not come face to face with Tia. It is difficult to say how this tragedy would have ended if the 5-year-old girl had immediately left her room upon waking up just a few minutes after the shots were fired. Upon returning home, David sobered up a little and likely realized the full gravity of the crime he had committed. Perhaps he was afraid that the police, who arrived in response to the call, would find him, leading him to decide to take his own life. Overwhelmed by these thoughts, David lost control of his emotions and attacked himself in the head. It all seemed like a monstrous act of cruelty fueled by the delusions and addictions of a criminal. The killer was found, and the case was closed. However, this was just the beginning for Tia, a brave little girl who witnessed her parents being attacked but did not lose her composure and called for help. In the wake of the tragedy and the helplessness of the judicial system, the public revolted. Citizens across the nation learned about this terrible incident that could have been prevented and once again questioned the effectiveness of the protection system and the authorities' powerlessness. Numerous proposals emerged to improve the system, emphasizing a need for stricter punishments. Even the fact that the criminal had voluntarily taken his own life and no longer posed a threat to society did not soothe the local population. People began to doubt the effectiveness of the laws. Concerned citizens and lawyers joined in. Journalists eagerly fanned the flames of the controversy. Many experts participated in discussions about what happened, but these conversations did not lead to any concrete actions. The fate of Tia became a pressing issue. People worried about what would happen to her next, and many offered to take her into their families. Tia found solace among relatives. After the tragedy and her communication with the authorities, she was taken in by her grandparents, who lived in Central Florida. She received words of support from the entire local community and became a sort of celebrity despite her young age. People did not want to limit themselves to just words, understanding that Tia might face financial difficulties in the future. Without parental support, her elderly grandparents could no longer provide everything she needed, especially in education. Although her relatives did not ask for financial assistance, compassionate individuals took the initiative to create a trust fund in her name. The extensive media coverage of this tragedy helped attract attention and gather much-needed resources. Furthermore, Tia would be able to receive funds upon reaching adulthood. However, even this was not what allowed Tia to survive the loss of her loved ones. It was her strength of character. Now an adult, Tia sincerely believes that her resilience was possible only thanks to the efforts of her mother and father. She recalled that terrible night very well, as it caused her significant psychological trauma. During their short lives, her parents instilled in her a sense of purpose and a strong character that she managed to demonstrate even at such a young age. This influenced her entire life. Having overcome early difficulties, Tia focused on her studies. During her school years, Tia became a local celebrity but remained modest and did not abuse her popularity. She was interested not only in sports but also in painting and music, which highlighted her creative nature. Moreover, Tia concentrated on academic success, as she dreamed of fulfilling her mother's ambition of becoming a lawyer and helping others. All her teachers spoke of her as a promising child with a great future. School psychologists also worked with her and paid her a little more attention than other children, which was understandable. The transitional period caused the greatest concern, as the traumas she experienced in childhood could manifest in unpredictable ways. But even during this time, Tia remained focused on her studies. She drew and played the guitar. Instead of becoming an unpredictable rebel, she found a new direction and began to help her community. Gradually, her efforts grew into volunteer activities. Tia was very grateful to those who supported her after the tragic loss of her family. Now Tia is 25 years old. She has received a college education and volunteers for several large charities. For these purposes, Tia has begun using social media. Instead of promoting herself, she focuses on supporting others. She shares advice with people who have experienced serious tragedies, helping them cope. She has become an example of courage and selflessness for many, wanting to thank society for its help. She frequently shares her story to exemplify resilience, proving that any difficulties can be overcome. Currently, Tia is quite private and avoids unnecessary attention. In her youth, she attracted media interest, participated in interviews, and often served as an example of the strength of spirit that a person can show. Now, however, she values confidentiality, aware that excessive attention can attract unwanted people into her life. Tia is now a young woman who plans to start a family of her own and hopes to avoid meeting people like David Johnson.